Number 5. The Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is an old London estate that has the unique distinction of being considered the most haunted building in the United Kingdom. No big deal or anything. Almost immediately after its constructions, the stories of hauntings started to come out. A local legend says that in the 12th century, a priest and a nun had an affair, and when they were discovered, the nun was bricked up and left to rot in the nearby church. And since then, there's been all manner of legend about her spirit roaming, seemingly in the halls of the rectory. The film The Nun could possibly be based on this. In 1900, the 4 daughters of the estate owner all said they saw a nun wandering around the estate at night. When they tried to speak to her, they got no response. The family had repeatedly claimed they'd seen this nun around their property, and at one occasion, what they thought was the spectral apparition of a horse-drawn carriage with a headless rider. From there on, there was constant reportings of bizarre sounds, strange shadows. In 1927, the original family owning the estate had all passed, and a new family moved in and immediately started experiencing hauntings all the same. The new family, the Smiths, discovered a human skull in the cupboard in a brown bag shortly after unpacking. They reported poltergeist behavior like unexplained footsteps, lights flickering around them, and the same sightings of headless specters. After only 2 years, the Smith family left the rectory, unable to deal with the hauntings present. The next family, the Foysters, experienced, well, wouldn't you know it, all the same things. Objects flying around their home, and on one occasion, claimed that their daughter was attacked by something horrible. They swiftly moved out as well, and the last owner of the rectory would be Captain Gregson, who accidentally lit the estate ablaze while unpacking, knocking over a lantern. Although an insurance report claims that they think the fire was started intentionally, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cast away whatever evil remains in the Borley Rectory, or maybe he unleashed it onto the world. Now my friends, if you want to hear more scary stories about haunted houses and just about everything else under the sun, we're the place to be. Subscribe and creep on creeping on. Number 4. Roland Doe. Now the story of Roland Doe is fairly notable as far as famous exorcisms go, mainly because Roland Doe's case served as the inspiration for the legendary horror film The Exorcist. Roland Doe, a name for the anonymous boy, lived a quiet life in Maryland. He was the family's only son and didn't have much in the way of friends while growing up, save for his Aunt Harriet, a spiritualist and lover of the occult. When Roland was young, she gifted him a Ouija board and taught him how to use it. Now in 1949, dear old Aunt Harriet would pass away, devastating Roland and the family. After her passing, the family started to experience strange, inexplicable occurrences around the home. Scratching would come from inside the walls, water would be leaking out of all the pipes, and curiously, Roland's bed would be moved around in the middle of the night. Confused, the family sought out the experts of everyone they knew, and their local minister suggested they needed the help of an exorcist. Priests came to exorcise the home and Roland, believing that the boy had been possessed by the devil. They strapped him to a mattress to begin, but had to stop when he broke the straps and slashed one of the clergymen with the strap. Red scratches appeared all over his body, reading out the word Louis. The family believed this was a sign they needed to move to St. Louis, where the family had relatives. From there, they were put into contact with a series of priests who would conduct round-the-clock exorcisms on Roland. The days would pass normally, but at night, the battle would begin when Roland would enter a trance-like state, speaking in Latin, gutturally growling, even threatening priests that Satan had taken him. For weeks, the priests toiled tirelessly to exorcise the demon, until eventually there was a miracle breakthrough. The priests called upon the power of St. Michael and told the demon he was coming to battle them. Roland woke the next morning and said he had a vision of Satan and St. Michael on a heavenly battlefield, fighting for control of his soul, and that he knew Satan was gone. From here, Roland lived a happy, healthy, normal life, and his case might have been forgotten if author William Blatty wasn't inspired by the case after reading a story about it in the paper. But without him, we never would have got The Exorcist, so it all worked out, mostly. Number 3. The Crescent Hotel. Now the Crescent Hotel is a beautiful stop if you're ever visiting Arkansas. It's been called the Grand Old Lady of the Ozarks due to its gorgeous old Gothic design and wonderful view of the mountains. What a shame that such a beautiful spot is said to be home to tortured souls unable to move on. During construction of the Crescent Hotel, a worker named Michael plunged from the death, fatally landing in room 218. The room has since been a hotspot for paranormal activity, with bizarre noises and laughter reportedly heard by the guests. But this wouldn't be the only haunting present at the Crescent Hotel. You see, before it found life as a hotel resort and a spa, the Crescent Hotel was run by a charismatic charlatan named Norman Baker, who ran an alternative clinic out of the hotel, claiming the spring waters had restorative powers and could cure any ailments. Of course, Baker didn't even have the slightest medical experience or training and was far closer to a two-bit con man than he was a doctor. Patients would check in and never leave. Baker would promise patients a cure for everything up to cancer, when in reality he was just injecting them with corn silk and water. Baker was arrested for his crimes in 1949, but the souls of those he tormented wouldn't find peace yet. All throughout the hotel, guests report strange noises, scratchings, whisperings, with some going so far as to say they see ghastly figures, floating orbs, and such. There's even a notable ghost who wanders the halls. A nurse named Theodora is the hotel's most prominent ghost, who manifests as an old woman flustered out of room 14. She hates mess and discord, and many guests report that they'll discover their belongings have been rearranged if they're staying in her room. There's even sightings of a ghost cat named Morris, who luckily is a benevolent spirit. Guests report hearing purring or feeling a mysterious warm brushing against their legs. I just hope there's meow mix in the afterlife. Number 2. The Winchester House. William Winchester was the heir to the Winchester rifle throne, and married to his wife Sarah, they lived happily. They welcomed a daughter, although tragically she fell ill immediately and passed before her first birthday. Shortly after, William would pass as well, leaving Sarah alone, depressed, and with roughly $20 million kicking around. In 1886, Sarah used the money to move from Connecticut to California and began construction on her legacy, her mansion. It was built for 20 years. She paid workers night and day round the clock, demolishing one improvement to make another. But the house wasn't built like any other house. It seemed random, like it was being built out of a dream. A staircase that goes nowhere, ending at the ceiling. Multiple boarded up rooms. She spent roughly $5 million on the construction of the odd home. But why? Did she just want something to start conversations when dinner guests were over? Well, shortly after her family tragedies, Sarah visited a psychic for advice, who told her she was being cursed by the spirits of all the lives taken by her husband's rifles. That is a lot of angry cowboys. She was told she needed to build a mansion to capture the wandering souls and seal them away from the rest of the world, and she made it her life's mission to accomplish this. She thought that the house's bizarre design would confuse spirits and keep them at bay. I honestly don't know about that. I thought ghosts could float and go through walls. I don't even know if they would care. The house still stands and is a popular tourist spot for fledgling ghost hunters, who believe that her massive ghost trap did work and she's caught spirits, with reportings of mysterious sounds. There are some who even claim that Sarah herself has been trapped in her home, doomed to walk amongst the spirits she worked so hard to capture. Number 1. The Bell Witch. In the 1800s, a farmer named John Bell moved his family to Adams, Tennessee, onto a bountiful 300-acre farm. Bell quickly became a figurehead of the community, respected by many, and becoming a local leader at his town's church. For the Bell family, things were the brightest they've ever been. They were living the dream. But things wouldn't be good for long, and they'd find themselves in a nightmare. By 1817, strange things started to occur around the farmstead. John found a mysterious animal, a mutant hybrid that resembled a grotesque mix between a dog and a rabbit. The Bell children would complain to their father that they would hear strange sounds that sounded like vermin gnawing at all things in their bedrooms, and the children would wake up with scratches all over their bodies. At all hours of the day, everyone in the family would complain that they could hear faint whispering and singing, and that it sounded like an old woman was singing hymns on their wall. Most tragically, the Bells found a mysterious vial of liquid inside their home that no one could understand. Nervous about what it was, John Bell offered a small amount of it to their cat, who passed almost immediately after. For 3 long years, the Bell family was tormented by these strange occurrences, chalking it up to a mysterious entity that would later be known as the Bell Witch, named after the mysterious old humming that they kept hearing. In 1820, John Bell grew extremely ill, quickly descending in health and passing. At his funeral, the mourners complained that all they could hear was the laughing of an old woman, mocking and singing at the late John Bell. The farm was so notable that it even caught the attention of President Andrew Jackson, who in 1819, a year before John Bell's passing, visited it to see if the legends of the witch were true. Allegedly, as soon as his carriage arrived at the property, the horses refused to budge anymore. The animals can always tell.
Coming in at number 5, we've got The Haunted. Before the Amityville Horror, before The Haunting in Connecticut, and definitely way back before The Conjuring, there was a horror movie focused on a Warren case without the backing of any Hollywood studios. There was a horror movie focused on a Warren case that wouldn't make it to theaters. That's right, a made-for-TV movie featuring all the haunts and scares you'd expect. Based on a book of that same title, it takes a look at one of the lesser-known Warren investigations. The Haunted aired first in 1991 and took a swing at dramatizing the Smurl haunting. Jack and Janet Smurl claimed that a demon inhabited their Pennsylvania home for more than a decade, leading to them seeking the help of the Warrens. This demon caused them all sorts of pain and suffering, from generating loud noises and bad smells to pushing people down the stairs. Apparently it even threw their dog at the wall one time. After all these horrific events, they reached out to Ed and Lorraine. The couple came to town and performed a series of tests to see what could be done about the demon. They attempted to play religious music and pray, but this just caused the demon to amp up its performance. Ed reported that mirrors would shake and often the temperature would severely drop. Dark masses were sighted, and at one point they even got a message written on a mirror, demanding that they get out. All in all, a pretty classic haunting. And while The Haunted doesn't connect with the Conjuring universe, it's still a pretty decent little horror movie. In fact, it even garnered Sally Kirkland a Golden Globe nomination for her performance as Janet Smurl. So if you're looking for a little bit of a throwback and are interested in one of the earlier depictions of the Warrens on the big, or in this case small screen, here you go, The Haunted. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Haunting in Connecticut. This one is particularly interesting as there's some controversy surrounding its claim to have been based on a true story. So the movie is supposed to be based on the experiences of Carmen Snedeker and her family. They moved into an old house that was once a funeral home, which usually results in some spooky stuff happening, right? This decision to move into a creepy place was influenced by the fact that their son was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and wanted to be closer to the hospital. After settling into the abode, they started finding evidence that the home was once full of dead bodies. Embalming tables, mortician's tools, and more were discovered, tipping them off to the previous purpose of the place. These details led a lot of people to not believe the tale from the get-go, but if you take the family's need for hospital proximity into account, maybe it makes a little more sense. Then started all the paranormal happenings, from objects moving when nobody was looking to the kids seeing strangers wandering around the house. A few months of this, and the Snedeker family reached out to the Warrens. With their arrival on the premises, things got a little clearer. Ed and Lorraine moved into the haunted home and discovered some new things about it. Apparently the morticians who lived there practiced necromancy, which ended up imbuing the house with a terrible curse. This explained the unexplainable events and gave a rationale for what was happening. They then performed an exorcism and claimed that the house was safe for the family to inhabit. Many folks connected to the Warrens and this story say that a lot that happened was exaggerated, which tends to be the case with a lot of paranormal investigations. A lot of it is up to interpretation, and the true story angle to this movie is especially dubious thanks to how they handled it. See, the Warrens don't make an official appearance in the movie, and a lot of the discoveries are made by other people. And in the end, the narrative chose not to do an exorcism to cleanse the home, but use a purifying fire to drive the spirits out instead. So while The Haunting in Connecticut is definitely inspired by a real-life Warren case and pulls a lot of elements from it, the facts are played pretty fast and loose. What can you expect though, right? Coming in at number 3, we've got Annabelle. If we're talking about big horror movies heavily inspired by the Warrens, it's just about impossible to ignore Annabelle. The Conjuring universe as a whole owes pretty much its entire existence to Ed and Lorraine, but their tale of Annabelle the doll is probably one of their best known. Creepy dolls work a special kind of magic, don't they? It's hard to imagine talking about cursed objects, paranormal museums, or uncanny investigations without bringing up everyone's favorite Raggedy Ann / porcelain nightmare. Tales of the two nursing students and their experience with this supposedly haunted doll have taken up a whole lot of space in modern pop culture mythology. And with the original Annabelle movie garnering enough attention to spawn 2 more movies and a whole bunch of tie-ins, they're definitely doing something right. Developing a brand new, cinematic universe-friendly story for the doll, we learn that in these flicks, Annabelle is a doll haunted by the estranged cultist daughter of a seemingly normal family. It takes a whole lot of twists and turns, and once a movie hits 2 sequels, you're bound to run into some pretty out there moments. But the OG Annabelle offers enough spooky moments and iconic doll scares to firmly cement it into the horror conversation. And of course, the famous glass case in which Annabelle is kept at the Warrens Occult Museum has a role here. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Amityville Horror. Another famous Warren case that garners a whole lot of controversy, the Amityville Horror pulls from all sorts of accounts. The main source seems to be Jay Anson's novel of the same name, which claims to be based pretty directly on the events at the Amityville house. However, there are lawsuits and claims of untruthfulness abound, so tread carefully. You probably know the story of the Lutz family by now, but here's a quick refresher. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his entire family at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville. He said that the voices in his head made him do it, and was promptly carted off the prison. A year later, George and Kathy Lutz decided it's a good idea to move into the home where this atrocity took place. Soon after, they began experiencing some classic haunted hijinks. Their kids saw phantoms, the family dog is done away with, and for some reason, George keeps waking up at 3:15 a.m. There is something spooky going on here. You can watch 2 different versions of this one too, which makes a lot of sense considering how famous the case was. This is arguably the Ed and Lorraine Warren case. So take your pick of either the 1979 or 2005 one and have a blast. And coming in at number 1, we've got The Conjuring. And here we are with the film that launched the biggest horror franchise running. Over $1 billion and something like 8 films later, we've got quite an overview of the Warrens through horror movies. The brainchild of James Wan and Michael Blum, it took a look at the case of the Perron family and their Rhode Island farmhouse. Honestly, there's a lot of great stuff here. The original Conjuring, when it released in 2013, was a solid horror flick with some awesome scares. Who could forget the clapping game, right? Although, as the franchise chugs along, the Warrens are often portrayed in an extra dramatic light, or sometimes not at all, but when you connect all sorts of different legends together, you can afford to do that. In the movie that started it all, their roles seem pretty close to their real-life actions though. As real as you can get while portraying paranormal investigators in a fictional horror film anyways. Flicks before this one did their best with all sorts of spooky stories, but none really delved into the legend behind the creep-hunting couple themselves. I'm sure countless other horror movies have in some way been influenced by Ed and Lorraine, but it would be a little harder to prove. But hey, you guys probably have some locked and loaded already, right?
Number 5, Annabelle. Well, it wouldn't quite be a video about the Warrens without Annabelle. Do you ever wonder, did they ever thank her for all the good publicity she gave them over the years? Now, by now, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the tale of Annabelle, the haunted doll that Ed and Lorraine kept captive, and probably the most famous case the two of them were involved in. They say that the Amityville Horror was their most famous case, but they made 3 spin-off movies just about Annabelle, so she's pretty big shakes. It was given to a nursing student as a gift from her mother, and within days it turned bad. Notes would appear around the house, scrawled in blood, that read out terrifying messages like, "Help me." It allegedly lunged at the girl's boyfriend one night, grabbing him by the neck. And after that, Ed and Lorraine were called in. I mean, as soon as a toy in your apartment starts trying to choke you out, yeah, definitely get some outside help. They called in to help exorcise the demon inside Annabelle. Now, in the end, they kept her locked up tight, surrounded by rosaries and holy water to ensure the demon inside can't harm anyone anymore. Now, while the stories inspired by Annabelle have gone on to big, great things, and the fictional Annabelle has enjoyed quite the career as a movie star, the real Annabelle is still locked away to keep that evil dormant. In this recently released footage, we're treated to some up-close and personal glamour shots of Annabelle in the flesh, or stuffing, maybe? Locked tight behind her cage. And this footage comes to us from Tony Spera, the son-in-law of Ed and Lorraine, who's taken it upon himself to maintain their legacy on his YouTube channel. If you're a big Ed and Lorraine fan, go check it out, because there's hours and hours of stuff to work through. He takes us on a brief tour of the museum, but gets up close and personal with Annabelle herself. Even through a YouTube screen, you can almost feel some evil energy radiating off this doll. Now, sadly, the Warrens Museum of the Occult is currently closed, so you can't visit Annabelle right now, but they're hoping to reopen it one day soon, so Annabelle can get back to scaring her fans in person like she always has. She makes convention appearances. Did you know that? She just recently was at the Warrens Paracon, the convention dedicated to supernatural hunters of the unknown. I'm not sure if I personally would take a selfie with Annabelle. I wouldn't want to ruin her photo like that, unless I could guarantee she'd look really good. I don't want to offend her in any way. I try not to upset any cursed dolls. And if you're looking for way more stories about Ed and Lorraine Warren, true tales of terror, fake fibs of fright, ghouls, goblins, cryptids, aliens, true crime, basically everything scary under the sun and above it, Top 5 Scary is the only place to be. Stay subscribed, stay scared, and don't miss a thing. But let's keep going, because we got a whole lot more video to go through. Number 4. Under Scotland. Now the Warrens' investigations did not just take them on road trips all over the United States. Now the Warrens might have visited a case in almost every state and then some. The Warrens' journeys saw them traveling all over the globe in an effort to uncover truths and combat evil wherever it was found. In this recently posted footage, we get to see a unique perspective from the Warrens, focusing on Lorraine Warren digging around underground in the secret vaults beneath Edinburgh. Under the ground is a series of large cavernous vaults that were once used as a storage space for merchants, but when abandoned became home to Edinburgh's lowest and poorest, who began to make it their dwellings. Probably really nice, what with no daylight, musty air, a thriving rodent population, and hey, for the right price, that honestly sounds better than most apartments in Toronto. Because of this, the vaults were the perfect place to conduct a little nefarious business, if you know what I mean. You know, all sorts of nasty crimes that aren't fit to discuss on YouTube. It's believed that two of Edinburgh's most prolific criminals hid bodies here before taking them to medical schools to sell off. So, because of its grim history, it's no surprise that people believe the vaults to be haunted, claiming they feel watched or touched when walking through them. So when supernatural weirdness happens, the Warrens are soon to follow. This one's actually pretty cool. It's kind of like going on a ghost tour from your own home. First person, making you feel like you're exploring those subterranean depths with her. The real highlight though is the guide, who's this very geriatric Scottish man who seems to know the tunnels very well. If I ever take this tour, I need to insist on my guide being an old Scottish man who I almost can't understand. That seems like the most appropriate and trustworthy way to go ghost hunt. Now they didn't find anything too much on this investigation, but while in there, Lorraine claims that she can feel something communicating with her long ago. Could it just be the spirits from long ago, or radio feedback? Let me know in the comments. Number 3, the Donovan Poltergeist. Now our next entry is going to cover the Donovan Poltergeist, an often forgotten case in the Ed and Lorraine Warren oeuvre. In this clip, moderator Tony Spera, he's coming up a lot in this video, mentions that Ed has told him that on a scale of 1 to 10 for demonic intensity, I love that you can rank demonic intensity like that, the Warrens found this case to be a 10. Now I gotta ask, if it's so intense, I wonder why it's not more well known, but maybe they're keeping it hush hush because this is going to be the plot of Conjuring 4, so I'm giving you the spoilers right now. The Donovan Poltergeist case was in West Hartford, Connecticut, when a young girl had come into possession of a Ouija board, one of the most haunted Hasbro products ever released, alongside the game Sorry. Ed briefly talks about how people can be so dismissive of Ouija boards. I mean, imagine who would be so dismissive of Ouija boards. Don't know anybody like that. And Ed mentions that although they may seem innocent and unbecoming like a children's toy, a Ouija board is an invitation for spirits to come and disrupt. The girl in question in the Donovan case asked the Ouija board all sorts of questions and started to get answers that only a spirit could give. Ed says that the spirit needed something in return, and afterwards her house started to become rabid. Objects thrashed around, levitating, so on. Ed describes a violent interaction with a poltergeist, claiming that at one point during their investigation, he found himself literally pinned to the wall by a malevolent spirit. He describes as well the house being pelted with rocks from the sky and objects vanishing. Imagine the size of the umbrella you would need if it's raining rocks. This definitely sounds pretty extreme, all things considered. They claim that they would watch things dematerialize in front of their very own eyes, as if Mr. Scott was teleporting them away on the Star Trek transporter. Now eventually, Ed describes getting in contact with a priest to perform an exorcism on the cursed house, freeing the family from spectral torment. And stay tuned to see if that's going to be the plot for Conjuring 4. I'm almost pretty sure. Number 2, the Japanese tunnels. Among the many accolades and achievement in his career before he was a ghost hunter, Ed Warren was a veteran of the US Navy and served in the Second World War and spent a good amount of time stationed around Japan. As such, from a young age, he developed an interest in Japanese folklore and the yokai and spirits that go with it. So naturally, they had to take a trip out east to go investigate some spirits there. They took a trip to Nagoya to investigate an apartment building that allegedly was being haunted by the floating head of an ancient samurai warrior. That's unnerving. I've heard of headless ghosts. I've even heard of nearly headless ghosts. But I think this is the first time I've heard of a ghost that was just a head. I think that honestly might be way scarier, just seeing a head like floating around down a hallway, but that's just me. Now this wasn't the sole focus of their journeys though, they had more going on. The two of them also sought out an exploration of Japan's haunted tunnels, a tunnel where 200 people were allegedly buried alive after an avalanche during a typhoon trapped some 200 souls inside and made the tunnel their grave. Local reports would claim that the people would hear the screams of the Damned late at night. So Ed and Lorraine visited it, and they both said it was terrifying and claimed that walking through it was freezing, the coldest thing either of them had ever experienced. Ed said a bitter cold came over him as he reached the end. He relays as well a story of a young man who tried to challenge his fear of the supernatural and ride a motorcycle right through this tunnel, paid for it with his life, and crashed. Now, for what it's worth, you know I love playing skeptic around here. You know I love getting my Scully on. I'm more of a Scully than I am a Mulder. I think this might be more of an urban legend because I did do a lot of digging for this video and I could not find any confirmed stories of a mass death inside a tunnel in Japan from an avalanche, but it's possible that it could be lost to time, very ancient, maybe records get lost, but nonetheless, interesting to listen to. And number 1, the Amityville interview. Now, the Warrens argued that the most famous case they ever worked on was the Amityville horror, and there's no denying that when this case happened, it gripped the American public. In 1973, Ronald DeFeo took a hunting rifle and went one by one, ending the lives of each one of his family members remorselessly while they slept. He would later go on to claim that he was being commanded to do it. He was compelled by spirits to act this way. A little bit later, a new family, the Lutzes, moved into the Amityville house, aware of what had transpired, but moving forward with it anyway. It's just such a good deal on rent. You gotta take it where you can get it. In this recently released footage, we hear from Ed and Lorraine speaking in great detail about their experiences working on the infamous legendary case on their TV program Seekers of the Supernatural with the Warrens. Lorraine outlines how immediately upon walking in she felt stepping into the house, she felt immediately wrong. She reiterates that upon entering, she felt a great unnerving presence. She says pretty much as soon as she entered the sewing room, she turned to the homeowner and said, "I hope this is as close to hell as I get." That's raw. The sewing room allegedly is where a focus of the haunting was, where the hundreds of flies apparated, where the spectral voices were heard telling people to get out. They speak as well of how they brought a reverend with them in the investigation who felt a physical slap in his face walking in. And if you're looking for more details about the Amityville case, the movie from the 70s and the movie with Ryan Reynolds, both pretty good retellings of the story. Ed goes on to address allegations that the Amityville case was a hoax, saying he offered a $3,000 reward for anyone who could prove to him that it was faked. Later in life, the lawyer representing Ronald DeFeo claims that the entire haunting story was a concoction he made up with the Lutzes over a bottle of wine in an effort to get a retrial for his client and drum up a bit of book business for the Lutzes. No word if he ever ended up getting $3,000 out of Ed. So whether or not the story really happened is one thing, but I think we can all agree the folklore that has come out of it is interesting enough and is a definitive part of the greater American mythos, this classic haunted house story. And it's entertaining nonetheless.
Starting off this countdown, we have the ghost in the photographs. In this footage, we see Ed and Lorraine Warren discussing a number of cases where they caught photographic evidence of ghosts. The show was hosted by Tony Spira, the Warren's son-in-law. The first case they talk about revolves around a woman named Gail Martin, who we also see here. Basically, Gail moved into a house and for the longest time, nothing spooky happened. Then one day she was out digging in the backyard and gardening. Her husband took a photo of her doing so, and when it developed, you could see a white silhouette of a ghost.
Years ago it was taken.
Here it is. Here it is, Tony. Now, you see that Gail is higher than that woman.
Then we have a second photo taken of Gail on the same day. And again, we see the same ghost in the shot.
Now, as you notice, Gail turns around and Gail is smiling. And because her husband is saying something funny. So at that point, the woman is smiling and she puts her hand up to her mouth in that manner.
Unfortunately, since it's old footage, it is hard to see the ghost in the photo, like its face. It just kind of looks like a white blob. Now, Lorraine actually made contact with this ghost, and that's when we learned about her sad story. So according to Lorraine, the woman in the photograph once had a child who she absolutely loved. She even built a place for him on her property for him to stay, so he was always close to her. Then one summer, he was working at a children's camp when there was a polio epidemic. Sadly, her son contracted polio and 3 days later passed away. The mother was extremely heartbroken by this. So when she passed away, she stayed attached to this piece of land. Now, when Gail started gardening, the ghost made herself known because someone was working on the piece of land that was sacred to her.
Is out in the yard, in the garden, and now you're doing something to improve that. After all of these years probably of neglect, now you're going to be fixing it. And I believe that that is the reason she's there.
The next ghost that they talk about, though, is not as nice as the first one. Let's take a look at it.
Above the chair, right?
Right above the chair.
Right.
Now, this is in the lowest level of that property, but they did have a lot, unlike Gail, they had all sorts of infestation.
So the couple who owned this house witnessed really dark paranormal activity, and that's when they contacted the Warrens for help to get this evil spirit out of their house. And lastly, we have the Providence Ghost Man. This next ghost that they are going to be talking about is of a soldier in World War II. The story is very sad and scary.
His wife was informed that he was killed in action, not even missing, that he was actually killed in action.
Then a week later, she committed suicide.
She committed suicide, and 1 week after that, he was found alive.
That is just heartbreaking. His wife literally took her own life thinking her husband died, when in reality, he was just missing in action. Both of the ghosts are said to be attached to that home still. In fact, no one has moved into that home since. If you look at the top right of this next clip, you'll see the ghostly image of this man.
No one ever occupied that cottage again.
Now that looks like a man,
Yes,
but we have other photographs which look like a woman.
yes, we do.
So where you have one spirit, you have many other
more
spirits.
than one, yes.
Moving on to number 4, we have the cursed objects. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then smash that like button because it really helps us out.
Many of the objects in this room here have had dire effects on people. People have been maimed, have been killed. People have wound up in mental institutions because of many of the things they write in this building here.
Now let's head on over to the Warrens Occult Museum. In this interview, Ed talks about how dangerous their museum really is and the number of people that have died or have been severely harmed after visiting it.
Raggedy Ann doll, which was responsible for the death of a young man who came in here one time, who challenged the doll to do its worst, and it did. Then you have a detective who was almost killed right in this room that we're standing in.
Now, the Warrens had a strict set of rules. They told visitors not to touch anything in the museum whatsoever. This is because their aura mingles with the object's aura and it can easily latch onto them. Next thing you know, you're bringing that demon home with you. Anyways, this is the process Ed will take you through if you do end up touching anything.
If anybody touches anything in this room, their aura mingles with the aura of that object, which is very evil. I would then tell them to close their eyes. I would vision them in what we call a Christ light, make the sign of the cross over them so they take nothing out of here. That's just a precaution that I always use.
As cool as the museum sounds, you'd never catch me there. In fact, according to Tony, when he arrived with the camera crew, the spirits were upset and decided to shut off all the lights on them to tell them that they were upset.
Well, we were starting to film, you mean, just as Rob was coming to us to start the interview, every single light went out. Every single light went out without any kind of jolting, just died. And then, what, 2 minutes later it came back.
That was a warning to get out of here.
So I think it's just about 9 o'clock at night. I think it's
And we
time.
should leave.
The way that Ed said that gives me the creeps. Like, yeah, it's time for you to go. The demons want you gone. Yikes. In our third spot today, we have the Warrens Museum. Again. The Warrens Museum is just filled with cursed and deadly items that literally could kill you. In this next video, you'll see just how dangerous and scary the museum really is, if you didn't pick up on that already. You'll be taking a look at one particular doll called the Shadow Doll, or Doll of Shadows.
And there are many what we call death dolls here. The doll you see here was made through black magic rituals. It's called a Doll of Shadows. Now, why is it called a Doll of Shadows? We'll take a look at it.
This doll is absolutely terrifying. Like, if you thought Annabelle was bad, this doll is 1,000 times worse.
It has human bones here and there and animal parts all over the body. You notice the nails in here and the tooth sticking out. Well, these are all feathers from crows and whatever. But this, I can tell through psychometry and through how it was made, that it was made with evil purposes.
So yes, this doll is composed of human bones and hair and teeth. The owner was using it for dark rituals, and in the end, the doll became possessed by a very powerful and malevolent demon. In fact, the way in which this doll was used is horrifying.
Now the purpose is this, that they take a picture of this doll, they send it to you, and they put the curse on the back. You take it and you look at it and you laugh at it, but it's not a laughing matter. Because once you see the image of the doll, it can be projected telepathically to you in your dream state. Dolls like this have actually come into nightmares.
Did you hear that? That is absolutely horrifying. But that's not all. According to Ed, this doll has killed a number of people in their sleep.
These images of these dolls can be so frightening that they've actually stopped people's hearts during the dream state.
Ed then goes on to tell how they got possession of the doll. So a couple ended up getting it for sale at an antique shop. The antique dealer practically gave it to them because it's cursed. But eventually they began to experience intense and horrifying nightmares. They later found out they were having identical nightmares. And one night the husband woke up with huge gash marks on his back.
The following night, it was not only scratch marks, it was claw marks. And very frightening. And they knew of us, they called me up. I went out there and they said, take this doll, please.
The scariest part? The doll can never be destroyed.
You see, you must be very careful with a doll like this. You do never destroy it. If you destroy it, you could have things occur to you that would be horrible. Because the spirits that are within the doll then are freed. And where do they go? To the one that destroyed their home. And this is their home right here.
In our second spot, we have the real-life vampires. According to Ed and Lorraine Warren, vampires are real.
Ed, I'd like to ask you about vampires just to start right off. Are there such a thing as vampires, and can you tell me an example of one?
Positively, vampires do exist, what we call human vampires.
But they aren't like the stereotypical vampires that we see in movies that are all like, I want to suck your blood. You know, have big fangs and a cape, and they don't look like Edward Cullen, sorry. No, they talk about two different types of vampires. The first being someone that hallucinates and imagines themselves as a vampire and just kind of takes on that role. The other is demonstrated by the Albany case from 1953.
Where the Calbani family had to open up a grave. And a family member had died, and they were saving a little money by digging the grave themselves. When they got down about 4 foot, they struck a coffin which shouldn't be there. It was their private plot.
He goes on to say that the coffin was of antique nature. They opened it up, and there was a perfectly preserved man in there.
And inside was a man about 45 years old. And he was fresh to the touch as though he had just been buried.
That's not even the freaky part. So even though the plot was there, there's a law saying you can't exhume the body until you get a court order. So this process took about a week. And when they went back to the grave, the coffin and body had both deteriorated.
The mother of the family went back and had the ground consecrated. And then they dug up the grave again, and this time, when they opened it up, inside was a corpse that looked as though it had been buried for many, many years, just a skeleton. The coffin itself had greatly deteriorated.
This freaked everyone out. Newspapers got word of the story and it was in the headlines for weeks. People went wild and were like, this is a vampire. And they were right. According to the Warrens, the man in the coffin was a sorcerer and user of black magic and also a vampire. He had put himself into a catatonic state. He was alive, but just barely. Still alive, but I'm barely breathing. And then at night he would leave the coffin with his astral body and find his prey. His astral body was being connected to his physical body by something Ed refers to as a silver cord. So no matter how far he went, he could still make it back to his body.
But while the physical body is still alive, there's a silver cord, a supernatural cord, that emanates from the physical body to the astral body. No matter how far away that astral body goes, if you go 3,000 miles, that cord would still be attached. It's only when that cord, that supernatural cord, is broken, that death comes to that physical body.
So somehow that cord got broken, and maybe that was when the woman got the land consecrated. And that's why the next time they went to the body, he was just bones. Now, you're not gonna believe this next part. I mean, it's hard for me to believe, I'm not gonna lie. So this vampire dude didn't arise from his tomb and go around biting people's necks to suck their blood. No, no, no.
And he would go in search of blood, but he would not bite into anybody's neck. He could take the blood through what we call teleportation, apports. Now today, of course, with all the ways that somebody could get blood, a vampire doesn't have to attack anybody to get that blood.
So vampires literally could be real and among us. They just can get blood sneakier ways, like maybe they work at a blood donation center or a hospital or something. Ever think of that? The Warrens did. And in our number 1 spot today we have Annabelle the doll.
All right, I think one of the most famous would be Annabelle. This is a Raggedy Ann doll that's made like thousands of other dolls, except that this doll was used in communication, almost like having a seance.
In this next interview with Ed and Lorraine Warren, they talk all about Annabelle the doll and her origin story. So story goes that a young nurse received the doll as a gift from her mother. She lived with a fellow nurse. The two worked together and lived together. Well, one morning, the nurse brought down the doll while they were eating breakfast and placed it on a chair at the table. This was meant to be a joke like, oh haha, she's having breakfast with us. But the next day, she did the same thing. She brought the doll down to the kitchen table and sat her down at a chair. And the next day she did this until something terrifying happened.
But the third morning, they're talking to the doll, and the arms of the doll are on the chair like this. Suddenly they went up and onto the table. Now this didn't frighten them, this intrigued them, to the extent that the one nurse said to the other one of the nurses knows a medium. Let's ask her about this. I'll bet you there's a spirit in that doll. That's what they did.
And that was their first mistake. So they did end up taking it to a medium, and the medium informed them that a spirit of a 6-year-old girl who had died in a car accident on the road by their house was latched onto this doll. Surely enough, they searched this and a young girl named Annabelle did pass away in an automobile accident near them. But listen to what Ed says here.
But God does not allow the spirit of a child to go into a doll. This was a demon who was posing as that little child to create sympathy to these two young women, which it did.
It worked, and this demon tricked the girls. They ended up looking after this doll thinking it was Annabelle, the little girl. They would take it out on excursions, buy it clothes, jewelry, etc. But then it started to attack the girls. The scariest thing occurred when the two nurses came back from their shift.
They'd come home after midnight, put the key in the door, unlock the door, and who do you think is standing there? The Raggedy Ann doll.
Standing there.
Now that doll has flimsy legs. If you try to stand it up, you can't.
Hearing Ed say this just sent shivers down my spine. Literally. Just imagine going home and seeing that doll standing perfectly upright. The doll later went on to attack one of the nurse's boyfriends by choking him out in his sleep.
I dreamt that that doll was strangling me. He had marks on his throat. Was it psychosomatic? Well, let's see.
But wait, there's more. The boyfriend ended up picking up the doll and throwing it across the room, and Annabelle did not like this.
Picks it up and throws it right across the room. You're nothing but a rag doll. You couldn't hurt anyone. With that, Tony, 7 psychic slashes appear on his body. Wow. Now, we've seen these kind of slashes. We've filmed them. These slashes come from nowheres. The blood came right through his shirt.
Then finally, Ed and Lorraine Warren got involved and took Annabelle to their museum.
Number 5 on this list is the haunting in Connecticut. This haunting is the haunting of the Snedeker family. List verse writes, after renovations on the house were complete, Carmen Snedeker entered the basement for the first time. There, she found embalming equipment and body tags with the names of the deceased. The family soon realized that the house was infested with demons. Carmen witnessed the water in her mop bucket turn a different color. She recalled the mop water was blood red. I mean a deep, deep red. It made my skin crawl. The middle son said the lights were coming on and off and on and off even though there was no bulbs in it. Ed and Lorraine Warren assisted in performing an exorcism on the house, which has brought closure to the family. Since then, no further paranormal activity has occurred. The Snedeker family remained in the house for 2 more years before they relocated to Tennessee. So guys, all of this is well and good, and it's what the Warrens want you to believe. Is it true? Probably not. You see, they had someone come in and write a book about the events that happened here. He went in and interviewed the family multiple times, and it turns out that they couldn't keep their story straight at all. They were all over the place, and it felt like nobody actually knew what happened. Then he went to Ed and told Ed that he can't write this story because nobody has any idea what actually went down. And you know what Ed said? Just make it up. That's literally what happened, guys. The story about this place is just made up, and it was probably never even true to begin with. Also, while literal mop buckets were filling up with blood downstairs, the upstairs neighbor was totally fine and just living their life. Seems kinda strange that the demonic possession would differentiate between floors, but I guess that's what the Warrens want you to think. Number 4 on this list is the vampire girl. Now this is one of those cases that, if it's true, doesn't get enough of the limelight. The Warrens have dealt with werewolves before, and we actually looked into the South End werewolf and what it's all about in one of our previous videos. But this vampire case, it never really gets talked about. The Warrens were brought in to deal with an 18-year-old girl who was going down a path of vampirism. This girl was very interested in death and the underworld. She started performing satanic rituals by herself and, as you'd expect, ended up becoming possessed. The possession was clearly vampiric in nature, and the demon was hungry for blood. It's said that she would wait in cemeteries for unsuspecting victims and then attack them right when they got there. It was reported that 16 people were bitten by this girl, and she would actually drink their blood. To my knowledge, nobody was killed, but there were obviously some pretty serious injuries involved. Now what strikes me as odd is why this case hasn't been discussed more. It almost feels a bit like a secret because it's never brought up and largely forgotten about. Yet, when you consider what actually happened and the events that transpired, this is one of the most shocking things they ever did. The fact that we don't bring up this case and talk about it more actually leads me to believe that if there is any truth to be had in the Warrens' exploits, it might be here. Maybe they were actually trying to protect the world from the truth here. The truth that vampires are potentially real. Number 3 on this list is Ed's relatives. This is something that really doesn't get mentioned a lot, but Ed Warren saw demons just like the rest of the people he tried to help. I think the media often portrayed the Warrens as these almost superhuman individuals who were impervious to the will of paranormal entities, but Ed certainly struggled with this growing up and for much of his life. Apparently, Ed would be frequented by the ghosts of long-past family members. These paranormal entities would speak to him and tell him to do things. He was pretty private about what they would say to him, but we know that he did in fact get frequented by them. Who knows what they could have told him to do though, or how long he was seeing these visions. I think the reason that this was kept under wraps for a while was to preserve Ed's image as the person who comes in and saves people from these paranormal entities, rather than potentially somebody who suffers from them as well. Number 2 on this list is Orange Cheyenne Johnson. This is the infamous Devil Made Me Do It case. Orange Cheyenne Johnson killed his landlord in 1981 by stabbing him to death. When he was brought to court though, he claimed that he was not in control of his actions and the devil literally possessed him and made him do it. Now this is pretty serious stuff, so how does Ed and Lorraine Warren fit in? Well, it's been speculated that Ed and Lorraine might have made the entire thing up, which effectively means that they were trying to get a murderer to go free based on a blatant lie. Johnson had a brother-in-law whose name was David. David was mentally ill. He needed professional help. The Warrens saw this as an opportunity and decided to try and exploit it. They came in and tried to manipulate the family to say that David was initially possessed with a demon and that Johnson came in, told the demon to take his body instead, and saved David from said demon. If the public believed this, then the Warrens would be smack dab in the center of a massive demon case. David and his family would get a lot of money from publicity deals, and the murderer Johnson would get off scot-free. It was a win-win-win for everyone except the justice system. Well, David's family wasn't happy about it after some thinking. They ended up suing the Warrens, claiming that they manipulated them and tried to get a guilty man to walk free, which if everything that I just said is true, they did actually do. Just another secret that came out that they didn't want to be revealed. And finally, number 1 on this list is Annabelle. In our last part of the series, we were breaking down some of the Warrens' cases and talking about how some of them may have been fraudulent. Well, a lot of you were commenting on that video asking about one of their most famous cases that I haven't brought up yet. Annabelle. The Annabelle doll is one of the most widely known cases that the Warrens participated in and would probably be on most people's lists when it comes to the creepiest dolls to ever exist. This doll even inspired the creation of a horror franchise of the same name that's had 3 separate installments in it. Pretty good notoriety for an inanimate object. Or maybe inanimate is the wrong word when talking about Annabelle. The legend began back in the 1970s when a young nurse named Donna received the doll as a gift from her mother. The doll took up residence on her sofa and at first was a nice and calming little plush toy that had nothing demonic about it at all. Soon things started getting a little bit weird though. Donna would go to work and find things out of place or doors open that weren't that way when she left. Then her and her roommate started finding notes around the apartment. Tiny little scribbled notes on parchment paper that would read, "Help me." Finally, it all came bubbling up when Lou, Donna's boyfriend, was in her apartment one afternoon by himself. The most common version of the story says that he was napping and then woke up to the doll literally trying to kill him, strangling him until he finally had enough strength to throw it off of him. Apparently he even had several scratch marks on him for a few days, but then they went away after that. This is when Ed and Lorraine entered into the mix. They took the story and absolutely ran with it. Apparently as they were taking this doll, which they had determined was possessed, as they were taking it back to a safe place, it tried to crash their car several times, and only putting holy water on it would stop this interference. Of course, no one else was actually in the car at the time, so we just sort of need to take their words for it. And that's actually the thing with this story. The only actual evidence or proof about this doll is that they told people it was haunted. There's no video of it moving, there's no pictures of it acting crazy. Anytime I've seen it, it just looks like a regular doll. Because of this, we can't say that it's fake, but we also can't really say that it's real either. I will say, after everything we revealed in the last video, I'm starting to have a hard time just accepting what Ed and Lorraine tell me. So honestly, Annabelle being fake could definitely have been another one of those secrets that they just didn't want us knowing about. Number 5 on this list is the relationship. As we'll look at a bit later in this video, Ed and Lorraine's relationship might not have been all it was cracked up to be. The couple that inspired The Conjuring have often been talked about as being one of the greatest married couples ever. In the movie The Conjuring, the pair very clearly have each other's back, and it's clear that there's a deep foundation of love between them. Or at least that's how the movie likes to show it. Real life may have been a lot different. Judith Penny was someone who would have had access to the Warrens' relationship and would have been able to see it behind closed doors. We'll get into why that is the case later and explain who Judith Penny is, but for now, just take my word for it. Apparently, she has come out and said that the Warrens' beautifully loving relationship that we saw on screen is all a bunch of baloney. In truth, Ed was extremely violent and toxic to Lorraine. This toxicity would manifest itself in many different forms. Oftentimes, it would come out in harsh, verbal abuse that felt as if it was coming right from thin air, totally unprovoked by Lorraine. However, occasionally this would manifest into physical abuse. Judith has come out and said that one particularly bad evening she saw Ed backhand Lorraine across the face with all his might, and apparently she lost consciousness. Now Lorraine wouldn't just sit there and take the abuse either, she would fire her own shots as well. Judith thought that some evenings one of them wouldn't even be waking up the next morning based on how much they were fighting and how intense it would get. This has all the telltale signs of a horribly toxic relationship. The pair were just very good at hiding it. Number 4 on this list is the Amityville horror story. I feel like you've heard this story before, guys. Arguably the most famous of all the Ed and Lorraine Warren cases, this singular case launched the pair onto the main stage as being some of the biggest demonologists and paranormal investigators on the planet. Therefore, it was incredibly important to their image and their brand that this story was believed by the public. Fact of the matter is, though, they made the entire thing up. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was the spark behind this entire story. In 1974, Ronald gunned down his entire family in that home for seemingly no reason. He was later sentenced to life in prison for his crimes and died behind bars at age 69. These murders were brutal though and were heard nationwide. That's why when the next family to move in claimed the house was haunted, it actually got a ton of attention.
The family said that slime would appear all over the place with no apparent origin. Things would swing open and objects would fly around the room. The house itself could simply not warm up and would stay incredibly cold for weeks on end. The media got wind of this, and so did Ed and Lorraine. They went into this place and went on to have their most successful case ever, ultimately concluding that the house is in fact haunted. However, this just simply was never true. The family's lawyer later came out and said that they collectively made up this story together and thought it would get a lot of traction over a few bottles of wine. The Warrens' initial success literally started by a few drunk people deciding they were going to pull a trick on everyone. Even though this news came out, the Warrens have always held strong onto the fact that the house was in fact haunted. Number 3 on this list is Judith Penny. Ed and Lorraine Warren were married right up until Ed died back in 2006. The couple had been together for a long time and shared quite the life together. I mean, think about all the crazy things that they did. I highly doubt that many people can say that they stopped ghosts around the world and became famous together. While they were at the height of their success, they looked like a power couple. A real duo that you wouldn't want to trifle with. Ed and Lorraine Warren together taking on the world one ghost or possession at a time. Well, during all of that, although it looked like it was just the two of them, there was actually a third. Judith Penny has come forward and said in a sworn statement that she had a relationship with Ed Warren for 4 whole decades. 4 decades where they were having an intimate relationship that the world had no idea about. Apparently, Judith moved into the Warren household when she was 15 years old back in 1963. Ed, who was in his mid-30s at the time, would sleep with her regularly, and Lorraine Warren was well aware of the entire thing. I mean, she obviously was, considering Judith literally lived with the pair in their own house. In fact, before Ed's big career of being a demonologist took off, it said that he would drive Judith's bus to school. How freaking creepy and gross is that, guys? Literally her school bus driver, but also her lover while she's 15 years old. This relationship apparently went on until 2003, 3 years before Ed finally passed away. Obviously, the Warrens didn't want any of this getting out to anyone and kept it very hush-hush. She even had to have when she became pregnant with Ed's child, and that was kept under wraps. What we thought was this power duo was actually a sick and twisted trio that we knew nothing about. The Warren family, before Lorraine died, came out and said that they had no knowledge of the alleged conduct. Number 2 on this list is the Lady in White. The Lady in White was a ghost that was said to haunt the Union Cemetery in Connecticut. This was another one of the Warrens' most famous cases and gained a ton of notoriety. Well, sorry to burst your bubble, guys, but it's fake. Let's roll a clip of what is supposed to be evidence of the Lady in White. So first off, where the hell is the ghost there, and how on earth did this qualify as proof? Like, frankly, I hardly see anything at all, but even if I did, guess who's behind it? Judith. Yeah, the girl that Ed had an illegal relationship with was the Lady in White. Literally dressed up in a sheet, and the pair took some grainy pictures and videos together and claimed it was evidence. Just another secret that the Warrens tried to hide, but eventually it's bubbled to the surface. And finally, number 1 on this list is the smoke and the mirrors. We've already talked about the Amityville Horror House and the Lady in White here, and about how they're all fake. Well, guess what, folks? I hate to do this to you, but they ain't the only ones. Everything the Warrens did was just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. This mural haunting saw other experts come in and look at the space. Nothing was wrong with it. Some of the exorcisms they performed, those people weren't really possessed by the devil. They were mentally ill people that the Warrens were preying on. The whole story about how they cured someone of being a werewolf, like, that doesn't even make any sense. Smoke and mirrors.
That's what the Warrens' career was. Now, that's not to say that they didn't inadvertently stumble upon something paranormal every now and again. I mean, if you believe in that sort of stuff, then they must have, based on how active they were in the community. But basically, a lot of our favorite stories that rocketed them to the top of the demonology community are completely fraudulent. I guess it's not the worst thing in the world to know that we aren't living among as many ghosts as the pair claim that we were.
Starting off this countdown, we have the haunted house. In this clip, the Warrens talk about a haunted house that they visited and the creepy things they encountered while there. According to them, someone in the house was using an Ouija board and it opened up a bunch of doors to the spirit world, and that's how it got haunted. Plus, the house was 50 to 60 years old, and for some reason ghosts like to haunt old houses.
Communication, Tony. There had been doors open through Ouija boards.
That's what I was wondering.
But unlike most times, we do not condone the use of Ouija boards.
Well, guess who was using the Ouija board?
This girl go down into that hatchway. It was horrible. Both Jennifer and I, at that point together, said, we cannot go. Then there was a boy, and the boy was 8 years old. Now that girl was coming over to care for that boy.
So the young boy and his babysitter were using the Ouija board in the cold cellar and let the spirits into the house. So apparently back in the day, 3 women used to live in the house along with their mother. While they were living there, they were haunted by a ghost that was killed back in the day. They would see apparitions of this young girl smiling. At first, it was just the mom that would see the ghost, but then one of the other women started seeing the ghostly girl as well. In one case, she actually spoke to her.
Then she actually walked over and sat on the bed. I believe there was a conversation between them.
There was a conversation between the two of them, and then this dark form, who we believe to be the person who had perpetrated it, of this man.
That's when they learned that the house was haunted by the girl that was killed and her murderer. The Ouija board had opened the door and those spirits came back to the house. Now here's an image that the Warrens took while on the property. The ghost also manifested itself into orbs as well. So both the photos you just saw are of real ghosts. In our 4th spot today, we have the Amityville haunting, and if you guys are liking this video so far, then smash that like button because it really helps us out. This is probably one of the most controversial paranormal cases of all time. On November 13th of 1974, Robert Butch Defoe took the lives of his parents and his 2 brothers and 2 sisters. The house was then put up for sale and the Lutz family moved in. And apparently the demon that got Butch to do that horrific deed started to attack this new family. Their doors and cupboards would swing open and close by itself, green slime would ooze from their ceiling, and one time a demonic face with red glowing eyes was seen looking into the house. So on and so on. The Warrens went to investigate and confirmed that the house was haunted. Now I'm sure you've seen the photo of the young boy peering around the corner with scary glowing eyes. Well, let's see what the Warrens have to say about it.
Yes, with infrared film.
Oh, yes.
And it's in the upstairs bedrooms. Just to the left there, you see what looks like a small boy's face looking out with bioluminescent eyes, but it is a diabolical spirit with luminescent eyes that appears in that home to confuse the investigators.
The photo has always given me the creeps. What I didn't know is that that was of an evil spirit.
You think that is an evil spirit, Ed?
Positively. Everything about this house was evil.
Again, this is a controversial case because some people believe that the whole story was fake. In fact, Butch's lawyer, William Weber, admitted that he just made up this whole story along with George Lutz. They created the story over many bottles of wine, they said, so they admitted the house was never really haunted. But then how come the Warrens insisted it was? I don't know, just some food for thought. Also, that photo of the ghost boy, terrifying either way. Coming in at number 3, we have the ghosts in the cathedral.
No, that's...
If you look at this slide now, I want you to see, don't point it out to them.
Don't do that.
Let them see where the man is. There's a man, he's right there in that picture.
I mean, the camera zoom in kind of points out where the ghost is, but if you didn't see it, that is a real life ghost that the Warrens managed to catch on film. Here's a close-up of it if you didn't spot it.
When there he is. See, right in the corner. And you see him, and that's in the cathedral. Now remember that the cathedrals, well, buildings in the United Kingdom are extremely old.
So I clearly see a man in a suit. Hopefully you all see that too. According to the Warrens, tragedy took place in the church and a number of spirits haunt the church. They didn't go into great detail, but back in the day, people actually got burned alive in this church for being part of different Scottish clans, and now their souls haunt it.
I think it was the
McDonald's and the Campbells.
Right?
Yeah, the McDonald's and the
And
Campbells.
the Campbells were burnt to death in that church, so you can imagine the terrible things that go on there.
Do you think the most hauntings occur like in places like United Kingdom compared to here?
Yes.
Coming in at number 2, we have the Anna Eklund case. In this next video, we see Ed and Lorraine Warren discussing the Anna Eklund case. Anna was an American woman who in 1928 became possessed and underwent a number of exorcisms. During her exorcisms, things would happen, like she would hiss or howl like an animal. She would float in the air, and whenever holy water would touch her skin, it would burn her skin right off. Let's see what Ed and Lorraine Warren had to say about this case.
Now this woman was under possession by her own father and devils from the age of 14.
Sadly, her father had taken advantage of her on a number of occasions in which she would try to resist. She didn't want to go along with it, which made him mad and made him start to resent her.
He hated her so much that when he died, he actually possessed her with these devils, right up to the age of 54 when Father Ressinger went to help her. Now she had 30 exorcisms performed, which all failed.
That is incredibly messed up, but that's not all. This woman underwent 30 exorcisms. All of them had failed, so they decided to send her to St. Joseph's Church in Iowa to see if they could get the demons out of her. When she arrived, she was placed on a cot in front of nuns.
They brought the woman to the convent, and the nuns were all stationed around this woman on a cot. Suddenly, a loud, bellowing, hoarse voice came out of the woman. Terrible obscenities, filthy obscenities came from the woman's mouth. And she rose into the air and went up to the ceiling and clung to the ceiling by her hands and feet.
Literally like the scene in The Exorcist. After that, she had to be tied down to the cot. That's not even the worst part.
And the nuns constantly were throwing holy water at her. This woman, outpours of what looked like spaghetti and human hair came out of her mouth.
That is absolutely disgusting, and apparently she would throw up 20 to 30 times a day. Not only that, but it stunk so bad that the nuns had to take 15-minute shifts with her or else they would fall ill. Imagine how horrific it must have been to be there with Anna and performing this exorcism on her. And in our number 1 spot today, we have The Exorcism. The footage I'm about to share with you is footage of a possessed woman going through an exorcism. It's footage directly from the Warren files. This exorcism footage is 1 hour and 20 minutes long. In fact, the footage had been cut down, so that means they were performing an exorcism for over an hour. I will say though that the footage was blurred by Tony Spira before he uploaded it to his YouTube channel. He did this in order to censor some graphic images, but also for the privacy of this woman. Although it's blurred, we can still see how crazy the woman is acting and can hear the weird noises that she is making. So you can see the woman trying to fight back against the demon that is possessing her, and she's crying out in pain from having this demon fighting to stay in her body.
Find the picture of Michael. Are you alright? She says he's over there. The devil?
So in the footage, you can see Tony Spira holding the poor woman as the demon was controlling her. She can't speak, but she's trying to do so. All that's coming out is gasps for air. But at one point she points beyond the camera, and Tony knew that the demon was in the room with them and was situated right where the woman was pointing. It gets even creepier when everyone in the room starts chanting along, trying to get this demon out of her, while Tony holds her head up still.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
It's scary, but it's also really sad. The poor woman was going through so much pain and suffering.
Number 5 on this list is the Triangle Field Ghost. The triangular field is a section of the battlefield that was fought upon during the Battle of Gettysburg, a brutal fight that took place during the American Civil War that is said to have claimed the lives of over 40,000 men. To give you an indicator of how bad this battle was, a surviving soldier from the battle is famously reported saying,
Some with faces bloated and blackened beyond recognition lay with glassy eyes staring up at the blazing summer sun. Others with faces downward and clenched fists full of grass and earth, which told of the agony of their final moments. There lay a headless trunk, a severed limb or two, and they lay in grotesque, abnormal positions that contorted their human form. All of that sounds absolutely horrifying, and it's no wonder that the triangular field has been a spot associated with a plethora of paranormal sightings. Ed and Lorraine have a clip from several decades ago when they visited the triangular field and saw what they believed to be the ghosts of some Confederate soldiers. Let's run that now.
Right there. See it?
Uh-huh.
Look.
There's nobody there.
So as you can see, there's definitely some movement going on in the trees, and it seems to be in the form of some white figures. This is similar to some of the other reports this place has received over the years, with others saying that they've seen Confederate soldiers dressed in white wandering the grounds. Now, I do want to point out that this definitely could be staged, but with the amount of lore surrounding this location and the way that that one soldier described the battlefield, I personally wouldn't be surprised if this spot is haunted and Ed and Lorraine stumbled upon some of the ghosts haunting it. Number 4 on this list is a recording about the Annabelle doll. The Annabelle doll is one of the most famous cases that Ed and Lorraine Warren participated in. This doll was said to have become demonically possessed and wanted to harm the owners of it. The clip that I'm about to show you is actually from Ed and Lorraine's YouTube page, posted by Tony Spera, the son-in-law of Ed and Lorraine.
Donna, the nurse that received the doll, received it from her mom on her 28th birthday. Donna was a nurse in Hartford, at Hartford Hospital, and she had a roommate that was also a nurse.
So that's the actual doll right there in the Ed and Lorraine Museum, and as Tony says, it was given as a gift. Obviously, this was a pretty horrible gift based on what it proceeds to do. In the next clip, Tony's going to detail just one of the sick and sadistic acts that this demonically possessed doll did.
He picks up the doll, he throws it across the room, and he says, "That's just a Raggedy Ann doll, can't hurt anybody." With that, 7 psychic wounds appeared on his body.
All of the stuff he details in the clip happened directly after this doll tried to strangle that same man while he was in his sleep. This doll went on to do so many other things as well, and Ed and Lorraine had to get involved to stop it. Just seeing this doll in these recordings is pretty creepy if all of the stuff that it's reportedly done is true. If I was Ed and Lorraine, rather than put that thing in my museum, it's going straight into my fireplace. Number 3 on this list is a recording from an interview. Ed and Lorraine Warren were conducting an interview on 2 young girls who were apparently possessed by a demonic presence. Now, I'm not sure how long this has been going on for, but based on the way that they are speaking in the clip and the mannerisms that they're having, I would imagine that the demonic possession had been happening for quite some time. I'm gonna roll the clip now and just pay attention to how the girl on the left is acting and the sounds that she's making.
How many voices are there?
600.
600 the voices.
I know the joke.
So as we can see here in that clip, there is very clearly a demonic sounding voice that is coming from the girl on the left. It claims that there's 600 different voices that come out of her, but then chalks that up to being a joke. When the girl on the right is asked about it, she says that she believes that there's been 10. Now we can only assume that this means that the girl on the left is currently being possessed by 10 different demons, or at least 10 different personalities and voices that have come out of her at one point. I also want to point out that the girl on the right looks almost pleased when she talks to Ed. Like there's some deep, dark secret that she's holding on to right now, or she herself is possessed by a demon as well, that is enjoying this chaotic situation that they found themselves in. I have no idea how a young girl would make sounds like that. I mean, it barely sounds human to begin with. Certainly some really creepy stuff there from Ed and Lorraine. Number 2 on this list are some cursed dolls. The recording that we're going to look at is of several dolls that were actually made by a witch doctor in Africa. Tony, the son-in-law, is once again in Ed and Lorraine's museum and showing us these dolls that have a deep curse on them. Let's roll a clip so you guys can see what I'm talking about.
And these other artifacts here. These are all artifacts taken from that witch doctor.
So right there are all of the dolls that were made, and in my opinion, they're all super creepy. We have shrunken heads, scary clay figurines, and Tony even says that he doesn't want to touch them because he's afraid of the potential implications that could come of that. The reason that he believes these are deeply cursed is all due to an incident that happened with a young police officer many decades ago. The officer actually had somebody go to Africa and steal these artifacts away from the witch doctor, then bring them back to America, and was intending on selling them for money. I'll let Tony tell you how that turned out for him though.
Within 2 weeks of this young police officer receiving these dolls, he became very, very ill. In fact, he was paralyzed from the neck down.
He goes on to later say that that man was paralyzed for 2 years straight until he finally died. I can't imagine being paralyzed for that long and then dying after all of that. And all because the witch doctor put a curse on these objects. After hearing that, I completely agree with Tony. I wouldn't want to be touching those things either. Number 5 on this list is the Dark Magic Doll. Yep, anything called the Dark Magic Doll is probably something I don't want to know about. That's most likely why Ed and Lorraine locked this thing up in their museum, because it's really not something that should be out in the public world for anyone to have. We've all heard about voodoo dolls before and the potential powers that they can have. Dolls that are made through some sort of dark ritual with the power to then affect people on a real life basis. Usually these dolls are made with a singular person in mind, and the doll that's created can only ever affect that one person. The same principle applies to this magic doll. However, the thing with this one is that from my understanding, you don't need to make it with only one person in mind. Simply using the doll while picturing an individual should create the same effect as a voodoo doll. It's said to use this thing, you need to hang it from its neck, and then the person that you have in mind is gonna get sick and eventually die. Now, I'm not sure if you can use this doll more than once, or if it's just a one-off, but it's probably a good thing that the public doesn't know such information. Think about how dangerous this doll actually is, especially if it got into the hands of the wrong person. Somebody who wanted to inflict harm onto someone else could easily do so from the comfort of their own home, and nobody would be the wiser. To make this doll requires some pretty dark rituals and some sinister magic, but the Warrens were pretty secretive about the exact process of constructing this thing, and again, probably for the best. Having information like that out in the open on how to make such a deadly and dangerous doll just isn't safe for anybody. Right now, the only known doll is currently locked up in the Ed and Lorraine Warren Museum. Hopefully it stays there and we don't ever see any more of these creepy things popping up in the world again. Number 4 on this list is the Smyrl haunting. So we've all heard about Amityville and we've heard about the Enfield poltergeist, but one haunting that didn't get talked about nearly as much was the Smyrl haunting. Maybe it's because it was just a little bit too scary and the Warrens didn't want to release such information to the public. An article discussing the 7 best cases from Ed and Lorraine writes, in 1974, Jack and Jeanette Smyrl moved into a house on Chase Street, West Pittston, Pennsylvania. Strange occurrences followed, leading the Smyrls to believe that a demon possessed their home. They claimed the demon had slammed their German Shepherd into a wall, bit Jack's ear, and pushed one of their daughters down a flight of stairs. Both Jack and Janet were said to have been assaulted by the demon. In 1986, they contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, who confirmed that their house was indeed haunted. Ed Warren would go on to say that he had witnessed a dark mass form inside the home and that the demon had left him a message telling him to get out. Now, one thing that I think gets glossed over a little bit in this article is the time that these people moved into their home compared to the time that Ed and Lorraine actually showed up. 1974 is when they entered this house, and Ed and Lorraine didn't get there until 1986. These people were living in a home that was severely haunted, so much so that they were getting assaulted by a demon, and they were living there for over 10 years. I think we think about haunting sometimes as being like a week-long scary event or something like that, but this was literally over a decade of living in absolute fear. Why this family didn't move is beyond me, but maybe they were scared this creature would just keep following them wherever they go. I think this is why this one doesn't get talked about as much. 6 months is one thing, but 10 years is totally different. Ed and Lorraine knew that and probably didn't want to scare the public into thinking that they could get haunted for potentially their entire lives. Number 3 on this list is the African fertility dolls. Tony Spera goes into detail about these dolls on the official Ed and Lorraine YouTube channel, and the story is pretty creepy. Apparently these dolls, which are now in their possession, were originally from Africa. They were made by an African witch doctor, but were then stolen from him and brought back to America. They were sent to a police officer who was in on the theft and thought that he could get some serious value for some authentic African fertility dolls. What he didn't expect was for these dolls to take his life. After he acquired these dolls, he soon became paralyzed from the neck down and, after some time, succumbed to this disease and died. These dolls are cursed, and after stealing them from their respective owner, took the life of those who were responsible. Now they're in the museum, and Tony warns us on the YouTube channel about ever touching them, for a similar fate could happen to us. It's stuff like this that really flew under the radar during Ed and Lorraine Warren's time. But the fact that these dolls exist, and there are probably many more of them in the world, is truly very terrifying. Number 2 on this list is the Southend werewolf. Born and bred in the Essex seaside town of Southend, the first inkling of trouble came when William Ramsey was just 9 years old. Like any normal child, he was outside in his back garden when he began to feel strange. It was deep into one Saturday afternoon in 1952 when an icy blast of frigid cold swept over him. Perspiration froze on his skin and a foul stench came close to making him vomit. The bewildered youngster only had 2 things on his mind: running away to a life on the ocean wave and wolves. By this time he was close to the garden fence, and only the calls of his mother brought him out of whatever had gripped him. However, something else took complete control of him instead. Intense and pure rage had installed itself firmly within his psyche. Using this and the adrenaline-fueled strength he now possessed, he had uprooted a fence post with the fence still attached to it and was swinging it like a club. Not even his parents could easily remove the post with their bare hands. That was a passage written by Les Hewitt talking about the beginning of the Southend werewolf case. This incident was the beginning of a long road for Bill. For 15 years though, he didn't have another episode until he started having dreams. Dreams that his wife would look at him and run off in fear after seeing him. These eventually ceased, but then 15 more years later at a party, it all came out. Apparently on the drive back home from this party, Bill lost it. He turned into a complete animal and the wolf came out. Scratching and biting at the driver, Bill had completely turned into a werewolf. His body changed too. His shoulders hunched, his nails grew to claws, his humanity had completely left him. The Warrens were then brought in to help him and had to perform several exorcisms to get rid of this werewolf presence. Think about this entire story though. Bill, to my knowledge, hadn't been bitten by a werewolf or had any extended exposure to one. He just became one. How scary is that? At any given point, I could just slowly start to develop werewolf-like characteristics and turn into a rabid super beast. I think that's why this case didn't get as much media coverage as some of the other ones. Just the fact that something like this could happen, and I mean, that could really scare the public. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Shadow Doll. So we already talked about some other dolls, but this takes it to a whole nother level. You know the horror movie franchise Chucky? Where the doll is possessed with a serial killer and it's out to get people, like that whole bit? Well, this doll makes Chucky look like the sort of thing you invite to your kid's birthday party. Yeah, it's pretty freaking bad. The Shadow Doll, for one, looks absolutely terrifying. It looks like this woman with a white face totally covered in black robes with chains and spikes sticking out of her. It's apparently made of bones and even has a human tooth in it. Now, even though this doll doesn't operate like Chucky and move around in the real world, it does something even more terrifying. Anytime you go to sleep, you aren't safe if the Shadow Doll has you in its sights. It's said that this grotesque-looking creature will come to you while you're sleeping in your dreams and terrorize you. It isn't said to be a quick kill either, like this thing's pretty sadistic in how it haunts you. It will keep coming back over and over and over again until finally it terrorizes you to a point where your heart literally stops out of fear and you never wake up. Think about how horrible that would be. To be absolutely terrified of going to sleep because you know that the second you close your eyes, this shadow doll could be upon you and it might be your last night ever. Similar to the other dolls that we talked about, this thing is locked up in the museum, but I personally don't think that's enough. I know that the Warrens like to show this stuff off, but honestly, screw it. This thing is far too dangerous, burn it with some fire, and let's be done with it.
Coming at number 5, when they were young. Well, sometimes you close your eyes and see the place where you used to live. This is true of Ed and Lorraine Warren as well. In fact, they were experiencing paranormal happenings way before they were in the spotlight. Looking back at their lives pre-demonology, there were lots of events that seemed to push them towards their career. Call it luck, call it destiny, the world seemed to have a whole lot of unexplainable events in store for the Warrens. Before Lorraine had even met Ed and still had her maiden name, she started to see things other people couldn't. At the young age of 9, she began noticing that some people were surrounded by different types of auras. Back then, she just assumed that everyone could see that. However, it became clear that these clairvoyant abilities were specific to her over time. Ed also had some paranormal experiences young, as he claimed that he lived in a haunted house when he was a boy. That kind of experience would drive anyone towards exploration of those kind of themes, right? Doors would open and shut on their own, and sourceless lights would appear in his home. Interesting, right? Well, these early appearances did a lot to inspire the duo to look deeper into the unknown as they aged. However, being young and inexperienced, they were also vulnerable to demonic possession. Neither ever told any stories of being under the influence of an entity while still a child, but they very well could have. A lot of demonic possession seem to happen in children, whether that means that they're more vulnerable to manipulation or their connection to the spirit world is stronger. So as young folks with a predisposition towards the unknowable side of things, they were at risk of falling under the influence more than most. In the end, it seems they fortunately avoided such a fate, but the world of demonology and as a result pop culture at large would look a whole lot different if either Ed or Lorraine's experiences were a little darker early on. It's wild to think what kind of cascading effects might have happened had they grown up a little differently. Ed apparently had to jump from a blazing oil tanker while serving in the Navy, and while swimming in that frigid water and fighting for his life, he prayed for help and was soon rescued. That near-death experience inspired him to profess his love for Lorraine and marry her. Imagine if instead he had questioned his faith or given into darker ways after such an event. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Smurl Succubus. Anytime a succubus or incubus gets involved, you know things are going to get tricky. Humans are often weak in the face of temptation, and this kind of thing does not exclude famous demonologists. I won't go too deep into the details here, but Ed and Lorraine are not universally loved, and there are some very questionable stories about the two and their predispositions. This comes into play during the investigation of the Smurl family. In the mid-80s, this family contacted Ed and Lorraine for help with their haunting. After moving into their house over a decade ago, they'd experienced numerous terrifying ordeals. Their dog was thrown against the wall with force by an unseen presence. Their daughter was pushed down the stairs. Jack Smurl's ear was bitten, and both he and his wife Janet were assaulted by a demon. The last was apparently a succubus or an incubus, and you know what kind of assault those demons are interested in. So when Ed and Lorraine arrived on the scene, they already knew what was going on. Confirming that the Smurl house was indeed haunted, they got to work trying to figure out what to do about it. During their time investigating, Ed noticed a strange dark mass, and it really put him on edge. Apparently he was also left a message by the dark forces at play, one that read, "Get out." And that didn't go over well with Ed. Wanting to defeat this succubus, Ed came back with holy water and rosaries. He used these tools to fight against the demon, but to little avail. Apparently he was thrown 10 feet through the air by the demon and attacked on multiple occasions. Had he stuck around much longer, who knows what would have happened. In the end, he admitted he was not strong enough to deal with this presence and reached out to the Vatican. They sent an exorcism team, and the house was indeed eventually cleansed. A happy ending for sure, but that is definitely a close call for Ed and Lorraine, don't you think? Coming in at number 3, some Snedeker suspicions. In a different haunted house, this time occupied by the Snedeker family, another demon had a hold on their residence. Poltergeist attacks were common, and the Snedekers were also being assaulted by whatever presence was inside. The house, which was once a funeral parlor, was home to many terrible experiments and abuses upon the deceased. It was said that the man running the place beforehand would use corpses in dark rituals, and even use the bodies for unspeakable acts. So when Ed and Lorraine showed up, they had a lot to do. After hearing stories of the Snedekers being grabbed and their clothes being tampered with, they reached out to the local church and performed an exorcism. This could have ended poorly, as Ed admitted that the presence was terrible and diabolical. Had this exorcism gone south, all involved could have been hurt, possessed, or worse. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Union Cemetery sighting. Here's another famous case. In fact, the notoriety of the ghost present here goes beyond Ed and Lorraine's influence. They added to it for sure, but the White Lady of Union Cemetery is well known all on her own, thank you very much. So much so that she's contributed to many classic urban legends. Now when does she get a movie, right? Well, regardless of movie magic, Ed almost fell victim to this particular ghost one time. Although, to be honest, she seems more benevolent than malevolent. Attracting all sorts of paranormal enthusiasts from across the United States, the White Lady has made quite a name for herself. Late night motorists might notice a pale figure ahead on the map and slow down to see if they need help. Often she'll just disappear at that point, but sometimes she'll try to hitch a ride with them back to the cemetery itself. Ed and Lorraine took a trip out to Union to see what they could find and ended up running into the White Lady herself. Trusty video camera in hand, Ed supposedly captured footage of the White Lady. The evidence is so controversial and important that it was kept hidden for years. To this day, the legitimacy of this footage is called into question, and I'm sure that the ghost herself wasn't too happy about being potentially caught on camera. One has to wonder if she made any attempt to prevent the Warrens from getting a good shot. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Perron predicament. Most folks would be happy to have some famous demonologists on their side when fighting off whatever's invaded their home. However, if it's not going so well, or if you haven't heard of the folks trying to help you, things could play out a little differently. Although the Warrens' involvement with the Perron family is the focal point of the first Conjuring movie, things didn't exactly play out that way. After the Perrons purchased their Rhode Island home, things started getting weird. They experienced a number of paranormal attacks from all sorts of vengeful spirits. At a loss, they reached out to a number of paranormal experts, eventually being visited by the Warrens. However, this didn't help out all that much. In fact, the patriarch of the Perron family eventually had to ask the Warrens to leave his family alone, as their intervention seemed to be making the demons angrier. Hell, they might have been egging the demons on to go bigger. Maybe if they stuck around a little bit longer, the demons would have found a way into the Warrens. It wouldn't be too surprising considering how upset the Perrons were at the amount of help they were getting. Wild, right? You can't always trust the movie for the full story.
Coming in at number 5, we have The Conjuring House. Upon its release in 2013, The Conjuring quickly became a fan favorite in the horror genre, with it being met with critical acclaim. The film itself follows demonologists and ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren, who head to a home in the country after a family reported demonic activity inside of their home. Now, at the time of the release, people knew very little about Ed and Lorraine Warren or the true events surrounding this investigation. The Perron family moved into their haunted Rhode Island home in 1971. Not long after, Carolyn, Roger and their 5 daughters began to experience strange goings-on. Brooms going missing, scraping noises and small piles of dirt appearing out of nowhere. All small things at first, which soon developed into big things. The girls eventually began to notice spirits around the home, with the history of the home soon being revealed. Many people had drowned in the lake, and of course the worst spirit of them all was Bathsheba, a woman who devoted herself to the devil and took her own life on the property, cursing anyone who would take her land. Ed and Lorraine Warren of course came to investigate the situation, with Lorraine conducting a seance to attempt to communicate with the spirits tormenting the family. During the seance, Carolyn became possessed, rising from the ground in her chair and speaking in tongues. Following the seance, the Warrens were kicked out of the home, with the family continuing to live there until 1980. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps out a lot. Coming in at number 4, we have Amityville. Back in September of 1977, Jay Anson published a book called The Amityville Horror, which would later become the basis of a series of films released from 1979 onwards. The book is claimed to be based on the paranormal experience of the Lutz family, a case which of course led to many controversies and widespread attention. Now, some history before diving into the story of the Lutz family. Back in November of 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his family at 112 Ocean Avenue in the suburban neighborhood in Amityville. He was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 life sentences, with him passing away in custody in March of this year. Now, DeFeo had reported that voices had told him to kill his family. Whether these claims were true, we don't know. Jumping forward, in December of 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children moved into the same home, and after just 28 days they fled the house, claiming to have been terrorized by paranormal entities while living there. On the evening of March 6, 1976, the home was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren along with a television crew from Channel 5 New York. During the investigation, a series of pictures were taken, one of the images allegedly showing a demonic boy with glowing eyes standing at the foot of the staircase. The Warrens quite quickly suggested that the home was occupied by malevolent spirits, with the Warrens' visit to the home being depicted at the beginning of The Conjuring 2. Coming in at number 3, we have the Smurl Haunting. The Smurl Haunting took place between 1974 and 1989, with Jack and Janet Smurl of West Pittston, Pennsylvania, alleging that a demon was inhabiting their home. The claims gained a lot of attention, as you would expect, with demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren once again stepping in to solve the case. Now, the family moved into their home on Chase Street, with them claiming that they were being disturbed by a demon that caused loud noises and bad odors, with one report stating that the dog was randomly thrown across a room. In 1986, Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the home, and according to Ed, the demon that was inhabiting the home was incredibly really powerful, with it shaking mirrors and furniture after they tried to get it to leave by playing religious music and praying. Ed even claimed that he felt a significant drop in temperature and saw a dark mass inside of the home. The demon also supposedly left a message on a mirror that read, "Get out." Ed and Lorraine Warren went on to state that their experience at the Smell residence was unlike anything they had investigated at the time. Coming in at number 2, we have the Snedeker House. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Snedeker House haunting thanks to the movie The Haunting in Connecticut. The Haunting in Connecticut movie was released in 2009 and directed by Peter Cornwell, and supposedly follows the alleged haunting of Carmen Snedeker and her family. Now, the movie has a ton of controversy surrounding it, with the author of the book the movie was based on even distancing himself from the accuracy of the events depicted in the book. Now, the film itself specifically focuses on the fictional Campbells as they move into the new home, which was formerly a mortuary to mitigate the strains of travel on Matt, her cancer-stricken son. However, not long after moving into the new home, the family becomes haunted by violent and supernatural forces. Now, the true story is a lot different. In 1986, Carmen and Alan Snedeker moved into a new home with their daughter and 3 sons. While exploring the home, they discovered tools used by morticians. Very creepy indeed. With it being discovered to be a former funeral parlor, with the eldest son beginning to see ghosts and be haunted by terrifying visions. The family eventually turned to demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who proclaimed that the home was infested with demons. Now, this is supposedly all very much true, however many have had their doubts over the years, including Snedeker's landlord, who found the entire story ridiculous, even noting that prior to the family moving in, there had been no complaints or unusual activity inside of the home. On top of that, the Snedekers stayed for a total of 2 years before finally deciding to leave. And finally, coming in at number 1, we've got Enfield Poltergeist. Taking the Warrens across the ocean, the Enfield Poltergeist has become a popular paranormal case, with it also being the focal point for The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 was released in 2016 and followed Ed and Lorraine as they traveled to Enfield in the United Kingdom to assist the Hodgson family, who was said to be experiencing paranormal activity inside of their home in 1977, with the daughter Janet even becoming possessed by a former resident. Now, this movie is very much based on a true story, however, when a paranormal experience is dubbed real, people tend to try and find holes in the story, with many doubting the accounts of the family. Like I said, the Enfield Poltergeist was a claim of supernatural activity between the years of 1977 to 1979, with it specifically involving 2 sisters, Margaret and Janet. In August of 1977, single-parent Peggy Hodgson claimed she had witnessed furniture moving and heard knocking sounds around her home. A police officer arrived on scene and he himself reported seeing a chair wobble and slide across the floor without any rhyme or reason. Following this, disembodied voices were heard, loud noises echoed around the home, and the children even began levitating. More than 30 people reported seeing furniture move and heard voices around the home. Ed and Lorraine Warren were of course called in to assess the situation, with them visiting the home in 1978 and were convinced that the events had a supernatural explanation.
Number 5. The Amityville Horror Photo. The Warrens had been around, claiming to have seen 10,000 cases in their lifetime. But there are few of many cases that got them as much renown and people talking as the Amityville horror case. Way before there were any Conjuring movies, way before it was a smash hit franchise, they were already making tons of movies about Amityville. The Warrens have been in the silver screen since the beginning. Amityville, Long Island was the center stage for the most infamous and strange case in America. In 1974, the house had been owned by the DeFeo family, until one day, Ronald DeFeo Jr. went one by one with a rifle and claimed the life of every member of his family, later going on and telling people that spirits had commanded him to do so. After this horrifying event, a year later, the Lutz family would move in, not much bothered by the house's dark history. You know, in this market, you gotta take a good deal on rent wherever you can get it. During the first month of living there, they realized almost right away that something was wrong. Swarms of flies, banging noises, and spectral apparitions of monstrous animals or phantasmal beings that the real estate agent definitely did not mention. Now, the Warrens were called in as they were experts in the paranormal, and they were called in to investigate the haunting and see if there was anything they could do. They brought with them camera crews and tried to record their findings, most famous among them a photo of what appears to be the ghost of a boy with shimmering eyes staring down from the stairwell. It's truly chilling stuff. Now, it has to be addressed even by skeptic standards. Sorry, we gotta play Scully, can't all be Mulder over here. That there is a lot of debate as to whether or not the Amityville horror was more like the Amityville hoax. George Lutz, the father of the Lutz family, contacted the DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, and said he was trying to get a book written written up about the client, and Weber had told news media that the haunting was all just a story he had made up with the Lutz family over a bottle of wine, in the hopes of getting a retrial, and in the hopes of getting a little bit of change for the Lutz family. So, what do you think? Was this America's most famous haunting, or was it just a fantastic backdrop for a series of okay movies? And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for some more terrifying true tales, or tales that ain't so true, from ghosts to cryptids to aliens and a whole lot more, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then way more. Drop a like and subscribe and stay scared. Okay, moving on. Number 4, Enfield. Another very discussed case from Ed and Lorraine Warren's case files is the infamous Enfield poltergeist haunting. It served as the backdrop for the second Conjuring film, although the second Conjuring took a bit more liberties than the other films. There was no Crooked Man or Valak in the original haunting story, but it's still pretty interesting to listen to nonetheless. It captivated audiences worldwide after photos surfaced showing what looked to be the young Hodgsons being possessed and thrown about the room levitating. It was 6 years after the Warrens had investigated the Perron family haunting, all the way in Enfield, England. The Hodgson family had been living peacefully there, helmed by the single mother Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children. It was the summer of 1977 when the youngest members of the Hodgson family seemed to be being targeted by spirits. They saw the dresser of their bedroom sliding across the room as if a powerful invisible force was pushing it all around. They would hear constant knocking from all over. Now the family called the police because they were worried that there had been a burglary, and when the officers arrived, they claimed that they arrived to a home where the furniture was free floating throughout the air. Pretty wild stuff. Now, over the course of a year, psychics, investigators, amateur, and all kinds of paranormal enthusiasts came to the Enfield house in the hopes that they would be able to figure out the haunting and crack the case. Of course, it goes without saying that if this many paranormal enthusiasts were all congregating in one place, Ed and Lorraine Warren were definitely there. They were certain they had their hands on a classic poltergeist scenario. Now, like I said, between the film and the true story, they differ pretty greatly in this example. Really, the Warrens were not terribly involved with the Enfield haunting that much at all. In fact, they were barely there for a few days even. Most of the investigators that had arrived to the Enfield property had kind of suspected that it might have been a hoax, or that things had been largely exaggerated or misunderstood and stretched by people involved. But the Warrens believed that they had a good, firm case on their hands. Now, unfortunately, we can't ask them, so we can only speculate. Was that because there was a real spirit, a real haunting, or is it just because they had the foresight and they knew that this was going to make a great script for an entry in a movie franchise someday? In 1979, 2 years after the first reportings, the Enfield haunting mysteriously stopped. No more sightings, no more reports. Was it ever really there? Number 3, the Shadow Doll. When you enter the Warrens' haunted museum, one of the first things you'll see is this frightening little doll, affectionately dubbed the Shadow Doll. It's made of bird feathers and real human teeth. Oh, that's just lovely, thanks. It's currently owned by Tony Spera, the son-in-law of the late Warrens and the current proprietor of the museum. He offers a little bit of insight into the doll's unique history, saying it was originally acquired at an antique shop where it was being sold with the owner unaware of the doll's negative energy, which I feel that is totally on you. You're running an antique store and you're not a little bit concerned that someone came to you with a doll with real human teeth and bird feathers? I feel like you don't need to know that much about the occult or to be a big horror movie guy to know that is definitely cursed. If somebody comes in and drops a doll off at your store that has human teeth, your first response has to be to chuck that thing in the ocean, not put a $14.99 price tag on it. Oh, anyway, Spera claims the doll has an insidious little gift inside of it, and that's if you take a photograph of the doll and then the photo develops, you write a curse that you'd like to inflict on the back of the photo, and then you send it to your victim. The person who then opens the envelope and sees the doll in the photo will invite the curse into your home. And I know what you're worrying about right now. Are you cursed right now watching this video? Nah, you're good. I think digital photos are fine, and besides, I would never write any curses on any of these photos. And if I was ever gonna curse you, I would curse you to always make the right amount of pasta and have your crush text you back. I would only curse you something real nice. Now, my big question about the Shadow Doll is, do you think it gets jealous having to share museum space with Annabelle? How hard must it be to be the second most famous cursed doll in a museum of cursed dolls? People come in all day to gawk at your movie star sister, get autographs and selfies with her, and you just have to sit and stew. No wonder the doll was cursing people. I think it's got some repressed aggression. Number 2, the Southend werewolf. This is maybe one of the odder cases in the Warrens' history, which is really saying something since the only thing the Warrens ever investigated was incredibly odd cases. This one was back in England again, in Essex. The Warrens got word of a particularly unusual case. This wasn't a haunted house or a poltergeist or a suspected demon possession or anything. This was someone claiming they had come down bad with a case of lycanthropy. There was a bad moon rising over Essex. A carpenter by the name of William Ramsay had claimed that since his youth, he had been cursed into transforming into a werewolf. Not every night or on full moons, but seemingly random times, the spirit of a wolf would overtake him and he would go feral. It hurts seeing someone live out your childhood dreams like that. He claims that he's been plagued his whole life, and his first transformation occurred when he was a boy. He was playing outside when he felt an icy breeze coming over his skin, freezing his sweat to his skin. He then said he felt a primal bloodlust and hunger coming over him, and he was overwhelmed by a pungent, awful odor. He flew into a fit of rage and found himself shredding a fence post with the fence still attached and chewing at wire mesh. Now for years he wrote this off as a strange incident. You know, something that every boy goes through when you're growing up. Puberty's a strange time. It wasn't until 1983 that the wolf came out to play again. William was out at the pub with his friends when he felt that familiar chill come over him. He felt the sweat freezing to his skin and excused himself to go to a bathroom, and claims that when he looked into the mirror, all he saw back was a wolf's unmistakable snout and yellow eyes staring back at him. He called the cab home but had to be held down by the driver because he was thrashing and lashing out at the driver and other passengers. Eventually, he composed himself. I think they gave him a milk bone, and he tried to live quietly after these incidents. It was in 1989 when Ed and Lorraine caught wind of the case. They invited him to get to Connecticut for a personal exorcism. I thought it was silver bullets that dealt with werewolves, but I guess that's probably a more permanent solution. Exorcism was probably the right way to go. Initially, William was skeptical, which I find kind of interesting. You turn into a werewolf, but you're skeptical that an exorcism will make a difference? Anyway, he ended up visiting, and reports claim that after a long night of violent thrashing, the wolf was finally exorcised, and since then, William Ramsay was able to find peace. And number 1, the satanic idol. I don't know, Ed and Lorraine, a satanic idol? A human skull? Well, those things sound like they could be haunted. Do you guys like haunted things? No way a satanic idol and human skull that were involved in dark rituals are haunted. No way. The skull was given to the Warrens as a gift, which is kind of an odd gift to someone, but hey, they were kind of odd people, so they were probably thrilled to death with it. Now the idol is a different story. The tall, slender, bizarre idol doesn't immediately scream Satan or satanic, but you can take a look at it and you'd kind of be unnerved. This is not the kind of thing I would bring in off the side of the road. It's not the kind of thing you'd want to catch in the woods, and yet for one lonesome hunter, that is exactly what happened. Apparently the idol and the skull with it were taken from the woods nearby to the Warren estate by a local hunter who'd found them. The hunter claims he was approached by a man in mysterious black garb who ushered him away. Now obviously he was a little shaken and stirred by such a bizarre experience, so he went to the only people he thought he'd be able to trust with something like this, the Warrens, and took the idol to them for safekeeping. After he brought it to them, Lorraine fell deeply ill with no one able to diagnose what was happening to her. Ed believed that his family was being targeted for welcoming the idol into their home. You'd think that a demonologist would have seen that one coming, but hey, we all make mistakes. Lorraine recovered, and although no details emerged on how she did or what they did to purify and cleanse the idol, we can assume most likely it was probably blessed, exorcised, and doused in holy water of some kind, otherwise it wouldn't be fit to sit amongst their other treasures. It now rests inside the museum, alongside all of their other haunted relics. It's evil waiting inside, as it waits patiently for a Hollywood executive to come to it, and it's open to offers for a 3-picture deal with spin-offs included.
Number 5 on this list is the recording of an exorcism that Ed and Lorraine Warren facilitated on a man that was possessed by several demons. Before I break it down, let's roll a little bit of a clip so you guys can get a sense as to how far gone this man actually was.
What other entity is inside you? God is commanding you. In the name of Jesus Christ, and all the saints, and all the martyrs, and all the angels command you to answer that question. What is it? Abaddon. Okay, who else? Who else is within you? Answer the question.
So as you can see, Ed is standing with a cross to our man who is possessed and basically holding these spirits at bay, trying to figure out exactly who and what is inside of him. He mentions 2 names in that clip, Abatar and Maveth, 2 very inhuman and demonic names. He also isn't acting even remotely okay in this video. Clearly there's an inner battle going on between this man and the demons that are inside of him. Later in this clip, when the man was asked why these demons were inside of him, this is what he responded with.
Why are you in Roberto? Why are you there with Roberto? Jesus Christ doesn't like demonic spirits within a human spirit. Jesus Christ hates demonic spirits to be within a human being. Do you know that? You hate Jesus, huh?
The man clearly says that the demons are in him for power and that he hates Jesus Christ. Incredibly chilling stuff, if you ask me. Number 4 on this list is a clip from another exorcism that Ed and Lorraine were present at. In this video, we're going to see a priest performing the exorcism, and the biggest takeaway that I got from watching this recording was simply how far gone this person who was being possessed actually was. Let's roll the clip.
This is the exorcism part right here. You'll see his spittle come out of his mouth.
As we can see in that clip, my guy is drooling and he looks to be in really rough shape. Later in that clip, he looks up and you see his eyes, and there just doesn't look to be any semblance of a human being left inside of him. He looks completely gone, as if there's no soul present in his body. Apparently, he was the target of regular demonic possessions and had to employ Ed and Lorraine's help to try and get the demon out of him. I can't even imagine being so possessed to the point where I'm drooling and seemingly not in control of my thoughts. Really scary stuff. Number 3 on this list is a clip of Ed Warren talking to a poltergeist in a family home. Apparently, this family has been haunted by this ghost for quite some time and have now had to enlist the help of the Warrens to free them from its clutches. In the first clip, Ed is going to be asking the ghost to knock on the walls of the home to answer his questions.
Are you a boy?
The mother leans against the kitchen table, her hands in full view as Ed continues asking questions.
You want the people in this house to move? 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. Yes. Okay.
As you can see, the mother's hands are in full view of the camera and no one is making the knocking sound. This ghost has also revealed itself to be a young boy who wants this family to get out of his presumed home. I also think that the mother's reaction is extremely chilling and genuine when she says that they tried and they couldn't sell. The clip gets even more chilling as it goes though.
And you to reveal your identity.
Next, Ed decides to confront the poltergeist alone.
Give me some sign. Is that you moving something? Give me some sign that you're here.
As we can see in that clip, the chair clearly gets moved by an unseen force. They eventually brought in 3 exorcists to assist in getting this demon out of the house, and it seemed to work when they did it. However, Ed and Lorraine both admit that sometimes an exorcism can only work to quiet down a ghost, and that it can sometimes come back several months or even years later. Number 2 on this list is some raw footage from an exorcism that Ed and Lorraine performed on a Buddhist monk. This was posted on their official YouTube channel roughly a year ago, and is pretty jarring. Let's roll the first clip.
I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you, Teresa. I'm here to help you. Think of your mother, Teresa. Do you see your mother? No, you see your mother. Your mother. She's talking English, Ed.
So as we can see, the person in question is in very serious trauma and their body is squirming in unnatural directions. They seem to calm down at the mention of their mother though, so potentially that's a way to reach the human soul of this individual. As the clip continues, Lorraine attempts to further calm the person with the mention of their mother, but eventually this stops working and the demon takes hold once again. The person is in full distress now, rolling all over the ground, and it seems as if their entire body is in agony. They also don't seem to be making any sense with what they're saying, just strange, unsettling noises. The clip doesn't inform us at the end if the couple were successful in their endeavor to get this person free of this demon, so sadly, we're just left with the horrible image of them demonically twitching on the ground.
Moving on to number 4, we have Scotland's underground city. And if you guys are liking this video so far, then why don't you hit that like button?
And today, there still are.
They're still haunted.
Yes. There are people like you that see them. In fact, I've never seen them, but there are people that see these ghosts floating about. Mary King's been seen up here, and she's been seen down at the bottom.
In 1996, Ed and Lorraine Warren visited Edinburgh in Scotland to investigate an underground city. The city was said to be haunted. In the video, you see an older tour guide telling them about the history of this underground city, how there used to be underground shops and stuff like that down there. At one point, he talked about getting bad vibes from being down there, and apparently Lorraine was sensing that as well.
So that's when you get the funny feeling.
I got funny feeling, all right.
However,
very bad feeling.
one by one, they all died off until there was nobody left.
It gets worse when he talks about how everyone died down there and there were just piles of bodies because there was no one left to get rid of them. Which is probably why the place is haunted. I mean, a number of people died there and didn't have a proper burial. Well, at one point in the video, Lorraine claims she hears a ghost walking by.
Can't be.
No.
What are you hearing?
Like the sound of people, of more than one person together walking by, and, you know, like heavy clothing rubbing against each other, that type of thing I could hear.
I'm going home.
And I could hear that, and I wondered, you looked, Frank, so I thought you heard the same thing.
No, I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
That's not all. She started to pick up on another vibe.
It feels like somebody's like squeezing your insides all together, actually squeezing the life right out of you.
I have no clue how she wasn't scared to death experiencing all of that. Honestly, she was brave. It blows my mind. In our third spot today, we have the family in Connecticut. And no, this isn't the same as the family from the haunting in Connecticut case. Just apparently, Connecticut has a lot of hauntings. So basically, Ed and Lorraine Warren went to Connecticut to help a family whose home was being haunted by a spirit. What I'm about to show you is real footage from this case. Basically, it starts with Ed and Lorraine sitting at a table praying with the family. Then, Ed tries to make contact with whatever is haunting their house.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come.
One knock for yes, two for no. Are you a man? Are you a boy? One knock for yes, two for no. Yes. Okay.
We couldn't sell.
Using that one knock for yes, two knocks for no method, Ed was able to find out more about this ghost.
Most here is it. Is it?
So the ghost was haunting their home and causing a scene because it didn't like the family's mother. But that's not the only ghostly thing that they managed to capture on camera. Later on, Ed asked the ghost to give them a sign, and then the kitchen chair moves on its own.
Give me some sign. Is that you moving something? Give me some sign that you're here. I command you to reveal your identity.
Yeah, no thank you. If that happened at my house, I would be out of there so fast. In our second spot, we have Maurice Theriault. If you've seen the movie The Nun, then you already know about a man named Maurice, or Frenchie. This guy was a hard-working farmer that ended up getting diabolically possessed. This occurred in 1985. Sometimes blood would randomly pour out of his body, like from his nose, eyes, and mouth. And he didn't know what was causing it. He also developed super strength and could randomly understand and speak Latin. At first he went to the police for help, then a priest, and then finally Ed and Lorraine Warren agreed to help him. Now, he apparently went through a number of exorcisms. The footage I'm going to share with you is from his last exorcism. So the footage starts off with Ed asking Frenchie to lift up his shirt. Apparently, random crosses would show up engraved in his skin.
At the front. Feet up in the shoulder? Yeah. Move, yeah, you're in the way, right? Yeah. Okay.
It literally looks like somebody took something sharp and carved crosses into him and then it scarred up. But those would appear all over his body, randomly appearing and disappearing. During this exorcism, a number of scary things happened. For starters, we see him drooling from his mouth, but as soon as the drool hits his shirt, it turns to blood. Then, at one point, we see Frenchie hunched over in pain. This is apparently because spirits enter people through their solar plexus. And then at another point, we see Frenchie become incredibly still and his face changes completely. He doesn't look like himself. His eyes look so glossy. And lastly, we see a cut randomly appear on his forehead and start to bleed on its own, out of nowhere. That is absolutely horrifying. And in our number one spot, we had the unseen tapes. YouTuber Haley Reese got the chance to actually meet up with Tony Spira, the husband of Judy Warren. He provided her with insight into the Warren cases and actually showed her some unseen exorcism footage. She then uploaded this onto YouTube. In this video, we see Tony and Lorraine Warren performing an exorcism on a man named Roberto. Take a look at it.
This is the power, Jesus Christ. Okay? You hear me? Jesus Christ has all the power. You have none. What is your name?
So in the video, as you just saw, they're trying to find out this demon's name to then help expel it. And guys, you're not gonna believe what demon was inside of him. Here, continue watching.
What is your name? Jesus Christ commanded you to answer that question.
What is your
What
name?
is your name? Beelzebub? Is that what you're saying? Beelzebub?
This dude was possessed by Beelzebub. When I heard that, I literally got shivers down my spine. Like, holy. So for those of you that don't know, in Christian texts, the name Beelzebub is often associated with the devil himself. They would alternate between using this name and Satan. He is considered one of the 7 princes of hell, and he is associated with the sin of gluttony. In other texts, he's described as the lieutenant of hell. He's second in power to Satan. It's crazy, but hold on. He wasn't just possessed by Beelzebub, but by other entities as well.
What other entity is inside you? God is commanding you. In the name of Jesus Christ, and all the saints, and all the martyrs, and all the angels command you to answer that question. What is it? Abaddon.
I genuinely don't know how they stayed so calm as this dude lists all the demons possessing him. The video went on and they found at least 4 demons were inside of him. They then asked the demons why they were possessing Roberto, and they replied with power.
Why are you in Roberto? Why are you there with Roberto? Jesus Christ doesn't like demonic spirits within a human spirit. Jesus Christ hates demonic spirits to be within a human being. You know that? You hate Jesus, huh?
I don't know about you, but that creeped me out. It is terrifying.
Coming in at number 5, we have the White Lady of Easton. Located in Easton, Connecticut, Union Cemetery is a site that dates back to the 1700s. And according to ghost hunters and paranormal investigators, it is one of the most haunted cemeteries in all of the United States. Now, according to local legend, a ghost haunts Union Cemetery who has been dubbed the White Lady. She's also said to haunt Stepney Cemetery in Monroe as well. She is described as wearing a white nightgown or a wedding dress-esque outfit outfit, with demonologist Ed Warren once claiming to have physical evidence to support these claims. Now, claims of paranormal occurrences at the cemetery had been occurring for decades prior to Ed and Lorraine Warren investigating the location. Ed Warren and several Eastern police officers visited the site, which is when Ed supposedly caught the apparition on camera. Ed claimed that several ghost lights came together to form the shape of a woman who had no facial features, but had dark hair and was wearing a white dress. Terrifying. Now, there isn't a whole lot of information about the ghost or the cemetery, however, Ed and Lorraine Warren wrote a book about the location entitled Graveyard. Maybe check it out. You do you. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps out a lot. Coming in at number 4, we have the South End werewolf. Apparently a lot of demonic activity occurs in Essex, with this being one of 2 to appear on our list. Born and raised in South End in Essex in the United Kingdom, Bill Ramsey began to experience trouble at the young age of 9 years old. He was outside one day when he began to feel a little strange. An icy blast swept over him and a foul stench appeared, causing him to almost vomit. Anger began to take hold and the young boy uprooted a fence post, swinging it around like a club with the fence still attached. It was stated that not even his parents were able to remove the post with their hands. Bill Ramsey then placed the wire meshing of the fence into his mouth and began to chew on it, terrifying his parents in the process, who supposedly ran into their home for safety. Following the incident, things settled, with nothing occurring for 15 years. Bill Ramsey grew up, got married and became a father of 3. However, during this time he was plagued by nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat and feeling dread and unease. Once again, another 15 years passed with no repeated occurrences of what happened when he was a young boy. That was until 1983, when Bill was out at a pub with a few of his friends. After having a few drinks, he began to feel that same chill he experienced when he was young. He went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and looking back at him was a werewolf. He hopped in a car with a few friends heading home. However, he began to growl with his hands twisting into claws, and proceeded to try to bite his friend's leg. After a handful of incidents that would follow this one, Bill was taken to a psychiatric hospital, with doctors being unable to explain his condition. Bill ultimately traveled to the States to meet Ed and Lorraine Warren, where a priest performed an exorcism on Bill, which supposedly cured him. But not before he partially transformed into a werewolf in front of witnesses. Coming in at number 3, we have the Borley Church haunting. The Borley Rectory was a home located in Essex, England, that gained widespread attention after being dubbed the most haunted home in England, with it being described as such by Harry Price, a psychic researcher. According to reports, the rectory itself has been haunted since it was built, with sudden reports being filed in 1929 after the Daily Mirror published an article detailing the account of a visit by paranormal researcher Harry Price. Now, the first major paranormal event occurred on July 28, 1900, after 4 daughters of the rector, Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, reported seeing the ghost of a nun not far from their house. However, when they tried to approach, the ghost disappeared. Other people throughout the years complained of similar sightings, including phantom coaches driven by headless horsemen. Freaky. However, let's take a look at the church. The hauntings date back even prior to these occurrences, with folklore claiming that the first haunting occurred in the 14th century following the execution of a nun who had an affair with a monk. The Warrens ended up traveling to Essex to investigate the claims of paranormal activity at the rectory, with people reporting ghostly chanting and organ music, along with sightings of the executed nun and of a ghostly monk. Prior to his death, Ed Warren even claimed to have captured a picture of the ghost monk, showing him leafing through a book inside of the church. Borley Church ultimately served as the inspiration for the movie The Nun, which sadly was a major letdown. Also, mostly fiction. Coming in at number 2, we have the Lindley Street haunting.
Lorraine and I were in that house for almost 3 days and nights. We watched as furniture moved around, smashed, broke. People came in and witnessed this, firemen, priests.
The home, located at 966 Lindley Street in Bridgeport, Connecticut, is a truly fascinating story, being dubbed the most haunted house in America, with the Warrens referring to it as, I quote, the most important poltergeist case of the last 100 years. The home belonged to Gerald and Laura Goodwin, who lived there along with their adopted daughter Marcia. According to reports, several people claimed to see furniture moving on its own accord and a crucifix flying off the wall. For those who know the case, you'll know that one of the key elements to the story is the report that the family family cat could speak, with claims surfacing that Sam the cat was caught singing Christmas carols in the family's basement. Now, at some point in time, Marsha confessed that the entire thing was a hoax and that she was responsible for the events that occurred. However, the Warrens weren't having any of it, with Ed and Lorraine believing no child was capable of being behind the incidents they witnessed firsthand. Whether you believe it or not, the case is certainly an interesting one that has divided many. I mean, when the Warrens are involved, you know there is going to be some criticism. Also, how do you explain a talking cat? Like, if its mouth's opening, it's talking. You know? And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Satan's Harvest. Now, many will be familiar with the name Maurice Theriault, or more commonly referred to as Frenchie, thanks to the movie The Nun, with the character appearing throughout. However, I should preface this point by saying that everything that happened in The Nun with Frenchie is in fact fictional, but the character is very much based on a real person. Frenchie was the son of French-Canadian farmers in Maine and grew up in a fairly toxic and abusive household, with his father exhibiting violent tendencies towards him. At the age of 51, Frenchie was living in Massachusetts with his wife Nancy and their children. To friends, he was a gentle man and extremely kind to anyone he met. However, behind closed doors housed something truly evil. He explained that his behavior was the result of being possessed by a demon, which pushed him towards violence. Blood would flow from his eyes and religious markings began to appear on his body. A local parish priest called in the help of Ed and Lorraine Warren because, of course, apparently everyone knows Ed and Lorraine. During their investigation, they saw Frenchie bleed from his eyes and saw symbols appear on his body. He also exhibited superhuman strength, which they believe was the result of demonic possession. They specifically believed that Frenchie had fallen into the grip of Satan himself. 3 exorcisms were performed on Frenchie, the latter of which proved to be something truly terrifying. Frenchie's face began to change, his skin burned and blistered, and on his forehead a deep wound appeared, and his eyes began to look like snake eyes. However, the exorcism ultimately proved to be a success, with him having no incidents following.
Number 5. The White Lady Ghost. Among the Warrens' career of demonology was this peculiar case involving a local Connecticut legend, the White Lady Ghost of Union Cemetery. Whoosh, that's a doozy of a title. Can't you just be a spooky ghost? Anyway, Union Cemetery dates back 400 years, and it's said to be haunted by this one notable ghost. The tricky thing is, though, nobody quite knows the exact origin of who she is. Some speculate that she's a woman who lost her child in childbirth and hasn't been able to move on to the afterlife because she still seeks out her child. Others speculate that she's a ghost of a victim who had been dumped into a sinkhole near the cemetery, and she's been unable to move on while this crime goes unsolved. You know, the fact that we don't even know her name or who she is, that's probably bothering her. That's probably contributing to all her worldly stress. The only things anyone can agree on truly is that those who say they've seen her claim that she's dressed in a bright white nightgown and has her head and face concealed with a white bonnet. One particularly good ghost story, local legend, says that in the late 90s, a firefighter responding to a call nearby said a woman in a white dress jumped in front of the truck and landed behind him. When he leapt out of the vehicle, there was no body on the ground, but a dent in the hood. Naturally, such a popular local ghost story caught the attention of Connecticut natives Ed and Lorraine Warren, and this never-before-seen footage was released by Tony Spera, their son-in-law, and it's Ed filming the cemetery looking for proof of the White Lady. We'll play some of it for you now so you can get your eyes on it and you can try to make out what's happening. Ed Warren claims that in the footage you can see the ghost walking behind him in the shadows and turning to look at him. Lorraine Warren once said this evidence was so important that it had to be locked away to be studied by the New England Society of Paranormal Research. And I don't want to pop anyone's balloon here. It looks to me like they locked it away because it's not really that impressive. I personally couldn't really see anything in this, but let me know down below if you think this is smoking proof of a ghost walking through the graveyard, or if it's just some blurry lights through the fog. And if you're looking for more ghost videos, stories about Ed and Lorraine, hauntings, possessions, exorcisms, and basically anything freaky, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some on top of it. Click through, subscribe, and like, and I am certain you'll find something to suit your fears. Stay scared. Number 4. The Museum Tour. If you want to go to the world's foremost collection of haunted relics and cursed objects, there's probably no room more affected by evil than the legendary collection of the Warrens' Haunted Museum of souvenirs from their case files. Now, sadly, as of this recording, the museum is currently closed down and hopefully reopening someday soon, But in the meantime, you can take a little digital tour, as this footage posted by the Warren's son-in-law, Tony Spera, shows Ed Warren giving a guided tour of some of the more unique and memorable haunted artifacts resting in that Connecticut garage. Now, the full video is definitely worth a watch if you're a fan of the Warrens, since it's about as close as you'll be able to get to walk around the museum these days. It's a full half-hour long of Ed Warren walking around, going into grand detail and recounting some stories about their more notable cases. Some shoutouts I'll include real quick include the witch Hannah Cranna, an old Connecticut legend, or the Conjuring Mirror, which might sound like it has something to do with the movie series, but actually refers to a bizarre case where someone used the mirror in a ritual to try and summon a demon and ended up inviting a poltergeist into his house. Ed talks briefly on some of their favorites, their cursed dolls and toys, such as a dinosaur from the Devil Made Me Do It case. And of course, no visit to the Warrens Museum could possibly exclude mention of Annabelle, who's basically the star attraction of the place and probably why anyone knows who the Warrens are and what keeps the lights on for so long. Annabelle is shown under a tight lock and key as Ed goes over her history of how they brought her in and first found her and how they eventually contained her. He touches briefly on her protocol, how she has to always be locked up in a storage box behind glass, surrounded by rosary beads and doused in holy water in an effort to keep the evil inside of her tucked away. And just a quick little small aside here from me. If a spirit is so powerful and so malevolent that it's able to possess a doll and contain unspeakable evil and attack humans, how is it thwarted so easily by a little bit of glass? I mean, I guess it's still a doll, it doesn't get demon strength, but I didn't know the solution for dealing with demons is the same way you deal with like a dog that's being kind of troublesome. You just put something around them until they can behave. Anyway, moving on. Number 3, an exorcism. To some, the ultimate paranormal dream would be getting to ride shotgun with the Warrens on one of their cases, getting to experience the paranormal firsthand under the tutelage of those who have battled it their whole lives. It would be like if Obi-Wan Kenobi picked you up on some backwater desert planet and asked if you wanted to go on a great adventure with him. It would be awesome. Well, some people get to live their dreams every day. Like me, you know, my dream was to stand in front of a camera and talk about ghosts all day long. A YouTuber by the name of Haley Reese got the rare opportunity to meet Tony Spera, the husband of Judy Warren, daughter of the family, and Lorraine Warren a bit before she passed away, and she got a blessed look into some never before seen footage of the pair of demonologists conducting some field work, namely an exorcism. Now, the person being exorcised, their name is Roberto, but they've been blurred out to protect their safety. Demon possession is one thing, but doxing is a whole other. We see Lorraine and Tony both fiercely conducting an exorcism, locked in a spiritual battle against the forces inside. We hear Tony asking for the demon's name repeatedly, not just because he's a friendly guy, he seems like he's pretty friendly, but because to properly drive a demon out of a host, you need to know its name. Well, just listen to what he answers with. It's gonna shock you. Beelzebub. Now, there's a bit of discrepancy whether or not Beelzebub and the devil are considered different entities. Depending on the text you're reading or the mythology, sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Either way, it's bad news. It's not something you would like to invite inside you. The worst part is if you're listening, apparently that's not even the only demon inside. It was like a clown car of demonic energy inside one guy. Now, thankfully, after a tough battle, they were able to get all the demons outside of him and hopefully banish them all away. Do you think it leaves like a weird taste in your mouth after you've had demonic possession? Like, you know, when you wake up, like after having a nap and your mouth just feels weird? I feel like I need to brush my teeth a few times at least afterwards. Number 2, Annabelle on tour. Annabelle is the #1 name in cursed dolls. Sorry Megan, we love you, but Annabelle's got staying power and she's just been here longer. More movies too, although on a side note, I'm hoping they make more Megan movies. As such, Annabelle has become quite popular, with a lot of demand for the cursed toy, despite the fact that, you know, she's got a demon inside of her and is apparently very evil, and she should be kept under proper lock and key. Did you know that there was a significant enough demand for Annabelle that she tours? Yeah, you heard me right. Annabelle tours. And you know what? I think that's great. Girl, get it. You gotta get that bag, you know? The movies made you a star, really propelled you to the world stage. It would be a shame to keep you locked up in Connecticut when your fans are waiting. A recent clip made the rounds on TikTok of a paranormal investigator, Eric Vital, transporting the allegedly haunted doll to take her to Paracon, a convention for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts to break bread, swap stories, and pick up cursed goods. founded in the Warrens' memory to carry on their legacy and establish a community of ghost hunters. Eric is part of the New England Society for Paranormal Research, the foundation created by Ed and Lorraine to further the development and research of the paranormal. Now, this short video of him unpacking Annabelle got all kinds of attention on TikTok, mostly from people wondering why you would want to take her anywhere, or why you would want to get your hands on her at all. I mean, inside the case she's carried and literally says do not open under any circumstances. Now, Eric did understand this, and he assured that those who are worried that they take all the proper precautions, and that's not just putting Annabelle in a seatbelt. We take this very seriously, he said. Our faith is very strong, all of us. So we bless the van. We all have enormous amounts of holy water. We have a priest come in, bless the area, and bless the items. And maybe put her in a car seat too, just to be safe. And number 1, Buddhist exorcism. You know, it wasn't just the United States where Ed and Lorraine worked on their cases. If there was a call for it, the Warrens would do their best to answer. Plus, I feel like if you only ghost hunt in one country, you're missing out on so many good demons and scares. If you're a fan of the channel, then you know by now just how many really fascinating cultural and regional monsters that exist out there and all the different ghost stories that exist. You know, you can spend your whole life battling demons, but have you ever gone toe to toe with a yokai or an oni? Maybe that's why the Warrens decided to take a trip to Japan in the early 2000s. Maybe they just wanted a nice vacation, or maybe they were getting tired of local poltergeists and wanted a new difficult challenge. They set out to Japan to investigate these allegedly haunted tunnels, where a number of people were reported to have died in. Ed was a former World War II Navy veteran, and he had spent a lot of time around Japan and was interested in their culture and the reports and things that he had heard. Of course, it was hardly a vacation, because while they were there, they were asked to participate in a Buddhist exorcism of a young woman named Teresa who had become the unwilling host to a litany of demons. They were aided by a group of Buddhists during their exorcism, a change of pace from their usual help from ordained Catholic ministers. We'll play it for you now so you can get some eyes on it. In the clip, we can hear Lorraine doing her level best to try and cast the evil out of the young girl's body. Now, the clip's a bit hard to watch, I'm gonna be honest. Seeing somebody writhe around screaming in what looks like agony, but luckily, they're being tended to by the experts, I guess. If there was anyone you'd want, it would probably be Ed and Lorraine and a group of Buddhists. Ed and Lorraine said the Buddhists were extremely helpful, saying they were cut from a different cloth. And if they're ever running out of Conjuring movies or running out of ideas for them, I think they should start sending the Warrens internationally. Or just stop pretending they're based on true stories altogether. Have the Warrens try to fight Godzilla, or have them fight the Predator or something. Let's see them exercise their way out of that one. Let's see holy water and a little rosary take on the Predator.